The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, March 16th, 2023. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Kate Aronoff, staff writer at the New Republic, on GOP efforts to target so-called ESG. And later in the show, Trita Parsi of the Quincy Institute will be joining us to discuss the Saudi-Iranian normalization agreement. Meanwhile, the Trump-appointed federal judge heard arguments on banning the abortion pill yesterday. A ruling could come at any moment. Walgreens said it would comply with any abortion pill ban, and now Walgreens' pharmaceutical distributor of the drug has followed suit. So much for woke corporations, am I right? Switzerland's central bank to loan Credit Suisse $54 billion to help strengthen its liquidity. A step short of a full-on bailout, but a bailout it still is. This comes as retail spending falls and economists raise the probability of a recession. The Biden administration has finalized a rule forcing power plants and factories in western and midwestern states to cut smog-causing pollution, the so-called Good Neighbor Rule. Jim Clyburn endorses Brandon Johnson for Chicago mayor. He's already fundraising for him. Interesting development. New figures show that deaths of pregnant women increased by 40% from 2019 to the year 2021 due to COVID. Georgia investigators apparently have another recording of Trump calling another Georgian election official other than Raffensperger, pressuring them to overturn the election results in 2020. Despite Labor's calls to nationalize the railroads, we're going in the opposite direction. The first major railroad merger has been announced in 2 decades. At least union jobs will reportedly be a part of that deal. Strikes persist in France, including sanitation workers. Macron's still attempting to move forward with raising the retirement age. And lastly, the White House is trying to force the Chinese government to sell its shares of TikTok or face a U.S. ban in a ploy to lose every youth vote. So authoritarian. All this and more on today's program. I know that for some people, they see it's very problematic that the Chinese government has shares in TikTok. I don't care at all. And I think it's immensely hypocritical because, yes, the United States doesn't have shares in Google or in Meta, but we have now troves of information proving that they have a very symbiotic relationship with the government in terms of sending information back and forth and privacy and all that good stuff.
Yeah,
so, let's be real here.
These sorts of laws throughout history, create even more bigotry after they're passed. So, I don't think it would have any real effect on whether people are spied on. I think all these apps spy on people all the time. That's their business model.
Yes.
But this will create anti-Chinese sentiment, and I think that's the actual product being pursued there.
We're seeing a rise in anti-Asian hate crimes in the United States. I don't think that is a coincidence, but hello everybody. It's an M Majority Report Thursday. Hope everyone is doing well. let's get into it. We have a great conversation. I pre-recorded it already with Trita Parsi coming up. But first we'll have Kate Aronoff. But before that, I wanted to highlight this piece in the American Prospect because I've been keeping just an eye on how Ro Khanna, who is the congressman that represents Silicon Valley, a lot of it, how he's been responding to the Silicon Valley bank failure. And, it's been mixed, but this was a pretty scathing piece that I think everyone needs to read, and we'll give you a lot of the information in a second in the American Prospect about his close relationship with Silicon Valley. Now, Khanna has positioned himself as a progressive, said some progressive things in the past, and I've interviewed him. I've met him in person. I appreciated his support of Bernie Sanders, for example, but these kinds of red flags are notable because there's no kind of room for what you're about to hear in the leftist wing of the Democratic Party.
It's like red flagger versus like sports metaphor. Like this is flagrant foul. Like what we're seeing.
Right. Ejection.
Like what he does with this. Yeah, get him out of here.
Or at the very least, next time he gets an ejection. Here we go. Let's put this up. Representative Ro Khanna, who stumped aggressively for a depositor bailout at Silicon Valley, this is the subheader at the top, now will solicit funds with David Sachs, one of the loudest supporters of that policy. This is just a bit of a recap of what we experienced. SVB's failure inevitably led to a weekend-long hissy fit, a special pleading for a government bailout from venture capitalists like David Sachs. Their insistence that the economy could be on the brink of failure worked. By Sunday evening, regulators announced that the federal government would be stepping in, meaning that all depositors would have access to their money by the following day. As banking expert Daniel Davies told The Prospect, these VCs could have easily covered whatever shortfall existed at their portfolio companies. The venture capitalists basically used the threat of thousands of startups shuttering as a political human shield to get a bailout. Yes, we've gone over that before, but the point here is that this venture capitalist is cozying up to Ro Khanna in the form of a fundraiser, and it's not just any venture capitalist. The co-author of Peter Thiel's 1995 book, The Diversity Myth, Multiculturalism and the Politics of Intolerance at Stanford.
I want to dwell on that a little bit. Like these guys are sort of credited with being these masters of investment, and they're just like culture edgelords who got on the right bet early on with PayPal, and they have a whole bunch of money to play with now.
It all comes back to PayPal, right? I mean, it's just incredible. And what's so funny, before David Sachs was at PayPal, he was at McKinsey. So it's just,
great.
What wonderful waters
populist training there
is swimming in. Yeah. He founded PayPal with Peter Thiel, and now he spends his time fundraising for the likes of Ron DeSantis, Blake Masters, JD Vance, and now I guess Ro Khanna.
Yeah, this is from this article. Teddy Schleifer's Puck News tweeted about how Sachs and his wife were hosting a fundraiser for Khanna scheduled for the end of the month. The price of admission ranged from $3,300 to $13,200. In a statement to The Prospect, Khanna said that the event was organized before SVB's collapse. And first of all, still a problem.
I don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if
David
SVB
Sachs
collapsed or doesn't. You should not be fundraising with David Sachs.
David Sachs has sucked for a lot longer than that. And it's clear where he stands on SVB. Well, more broadly, however, he said, politics is about bridge building and persuasion. David Sachs and I have disagreements, but we must find common ground. We find common ground on cutting bloated defense spending, opposing the Yemen war and the First Amendment. Having core convictions, but engaging with those who see the world differently, is so needed in our nation. And I'll just say this: no, it's not. Venture capitalists, none of these guys are needed. These are all charlatans, basically masquerading for investments. Their track record is BS. And like their return on investment for venture capital is extremely, extremely low.
Yeah.
And like they're a creation of basically the last 10 years plus of monetary policy, where instead of saying doing basic things like keeping people in their houses and expanding like union labor protections and stuff like that. We've been flooding the zone with cash so speculators like David Sachs could play with it. They are creations of our inability to actually address the root causes of problems. And like, of course this is going to happen. And like the idea that he shouldn't even be deciding any future economic priorities of innovation as like a venture capitalist, but the idea that a congressperson would want to consult with him about the military state, great, he has opinions that are like semi agreeable, I guess. I mean, we'll kick the tires on those a little bit, but like he should not be in this position at all.
No. And I mean, when you talk about their speculative, vampiric nature, I guess, I mean, a lot of this has been on steroids since during COVID. These venture capitalists use the very low interest rates to make wild swings. And then when rates got higher and they were increased exponentially, in a move by Jerome Powell that we've criticized immensely on this show, that was a big contributor to the instability that we're seeing right now. And so these are the exact kinds of people you should not be hanging out with, let alone raising money with. Like, this is not just a exchange of ideas or a meeting that they're going to telecast and have a debate. He's raising money for him.
Yeah.
And like other people that David Sachs raises money for, I mean, you have to understand that there's something that Sachs sees in Kana that he also sees in DeSantis, that he also sees in Masters, that he also sees in Vance. And that should be immensely concerning to people.
And I'm wondering if Kana isn't just extremely cynical himself. Some of these quotes here. Well, first I want to read this one from Jeff Hauser of the Revolving Door Project, because I think it's pointed. That bailout-seeking bigots like Sachs are embracing Ro Khanna is a strong piece of evidence that Khanna's progressivism is more performative than genuine. Khanna will have serious work to do to repair this wild error in judgment. I co-sign that. And here's the thing that really bugs me. Furthermore, in a statement to the Prospect, Khanna suggested that fundraising with Sachs could spark a conversation for progressives to debate the merits of a Medicare for all system. The Prospect did not ask Khan about his support for a universal healthcare system. Still, he said unprompted, if progressives want to get policies like Medicare for all passed, we have to make the case. Let's have these conversations without compromising our convictions. Why are we having these conversations with venture capitalists that are raising money for you, bro?
Yeah, it's not a conversation.
That's cynical. This seems like a political liar to me, and I agree with Hauser. He has a lot to do to repair for this sort of stuff. Like, this is absolutely appalling to me.
Yeah, I mean, this is the author of this piece, Jared Bradley.
Facundo.
Yeah, sorry. Writes after that, it's a strange move on Khanna's part. It's extremely unlikely that Medicare for All will find any traction during this congressional session. Legislation would probably have to pass broadly against East Palestine, pass to broadly assist East Palestine or Jackson for that matter. And the Republican House is unlikely to do any of that because they're referencing that he talking about East Palestine and Jackson, Mississippi, to hedge his support for the SVB bailout. So
he's just deploying it as it's off the table. As it's off the table, it's time to talk about it now. It's like how certain people endorse Tulsi, and now all of a sudden they're the big Medicare for all defenders. But it's just like you invoke something that doesn't actually isn't actionable at the moment to make yourself look good. And like, this is a huge problem. Roe is snake. Like, come on, man. Make this better, or you've confirmed what people have been saying about you with regards to being owned by venture capital.
Yep. And I think, people dismiss that vote on denouncing the horrors of socialism as performative, but it was important. Like,
was Roe? I forgot. Was Roe?
Yes. We're paying. It's paying dividends. It's paying. Yeah, you were on vacation, right? It's paying dividends, like in just these recent stories that have been coming out about Katie Porter and Ro Khanna. I believe Katie Porter voted against it. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. But at least with Ro Khanna, I was like, that's suspicious and should tell you who he's speaking to, especially when he tries to position himself in the anti-war space. That means that you don't really have a general comprehensive understanding about U.S. empire and what Cold War politics have done to the world.
Yeah.
And so you can't be anti-war and still talk about endorse the United States is completely warped framing on socialism and communism, right? And what it has done to the world. When you're supposed to be combating U.S. empire, it's silly.
This sort of the whole libertarian thing, like we're anti-war. I don't like Elon Musk is supposedly anti-war too, and he's a defense contractor,
right?
Right. So like I don't buy this stuff. I think it's as deep as when Ro Khanna invokes Medicare for all there.
Yes.
Or as shallow, I should say.
And just to yes and that again, when you hear libertarians or guys like Elon Musk talk about an anti-war position, it's usually just because they think it's politically useful as a way to advocate for austerity. Because they're talking about cutting budgets, and they throw that out there to get appeals to people who might be a little bit more naive on that front. Well, with that said, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be speaking with Kate Aronoff about these Republican anti-ESG efforts. We are back, and we are joined now, again, a friend of the show, Kate Aronoff, staff writer at The New Republic, author of the book Overheated, How Capitalism Broke the Planet, and How We Fight Back. Kate, thanks so much for coming on.
Great to be back.
Yeah. So let's start by playing this, because I think this is helpful to analyze your piece with. Recently, over the past few weeks, there has been a push by Republicans, and they successfully passed it in the House and the Senate. Biden's going to veto it, but it's this denouncement of woke ESG policies. And a lot of Republicans are kind of running with this. I'm going to ask you what this really entails, but here's Kevin McCarthy making that case, and I know Larry Kudlow did as well today. They're really sticking with this. About Biden's woke ESG regulatory efforts.
Do you have a 401k or some kind of retirement plan through work? If so, what I'm about to tell you affects you directly. A new regulation from the Biden administration allows your retirement savings to be used to fund a political agenda you may not agree with. It lets Wall Street redirect your money into something called ESG investments. The goals of these funds isn't to maximize your return or grow your savings relative to other funds. These are woke priorities whose primary purpose is to push a far-left political activism. But there's good news. Republicans and a few free-thinking Democrats voted to block Biden's woke ESG rule. The House and Senate both passed it. I just signed it, and now it goes to the president's desk. Unfortunately, he is threatening to use his first veto against it. Now, I hope he changes his mind and sides with American workers over Wall Street. If not, it will really show us where his priorities lie.
Can I just say, like, there's so many cuts in that because Kevin McCarthy has a tough time stringing sentences together.
He's not very charismatic or intelligent.
Everybody's all posed up.
Yeah, right. Like, so, okay, there's a lot there, right? One, yeah. I would say, hey, Kevin McCarthy, if you don't want Americans' retirement savings to be the at the whims of the market with 401ks. Hey, buddy, we can just strengthen Social Security, and how about expand Medicare? We'll just do that right away, bipartisan agreement. But like, I mean, what do you make of that, right? Biden is going to veto this, but the Republican fixation on this, it's an interesting tactic, to say the least.
Yeah, it's hard to know where to start, and in covering this genre of content. I feel like I return to the sort of hallmarks of thinking about climate denial and covering climate denial, which is like if you try to go through and unpick everything that's wrong or false, you just like end up down a rabbit hole nobody particularly wants to be in. I will point out one thing of like the many inaccuracies in that clip, which is sort of ubiquitous across these sorts of talking points. But ESG funds, right? ESG stands for environmental, social governance, is this very broad category of things. Kevin McCarthy is I think willfully sort of misrepresenting what is happening, which is that ESG funds in particular. So these are products that asset managers will sell to institutional investors like pension funds or retail investors to invest their money. ESG funds are a very specific thing and make up a very small percentage of the products that companies like BlackRock or State Street, the big managers, offer. So pension funds are not really going into ESG funds. What he's referring to in this sort of obliquely, very intentionally misleading way is that these companies have embraced a set of sort of investment priorities around ESG broadly, right? And so they Larry Fink, in particular, the CEO of BlackRock, has said that ESG factors are sort of an important consideration in how they make investments for entirely capitalistic reasons, right? And considering sort of climate risk, if you have a lot of investments in Miami real estate, for instance, is just a very material, important thing to consider for the returns of those assets. I won't. There's obviously a lot to unpack in that clip, but that would be the one that I will mention. And maybe just one more thing. Is that, the whole argument around this anti-ESG crusade is that it's threatening returns, when almost the opposite is true, right? And that, because you see Republican-led state governments starting to pull funds out of BlackRock, they're left to rely on a much more sort of niche set, or just less sort of optimal places to park pension money in, for instance. And because the asset management industry is so concentrated among the big three, which is, a problem in its own right, I think, many people of political strikes will argue, you're left with asset managers who just offer simply worse returns. And so if you're taking money out of a BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, you're just going with worse products and can expect worse yields from, teachers and state employee retiree pensions.
And when it comes to 401ks too, it's just hilarious to me that anyone really the average person does not pay a ton of mind into what goes into their 401k, nor are they parsing through trying to make determinations about it. I mean, you can, for a 401k, it's basically what are you going to deduct, what are you going to put in, and that's really the extent of what people do when they're putting into their 401ks. And we were just talking about how the 401k is not a viable experiment for social insurance, and yet this is the kind of future that people like Mike McCarthy or Kevin McCarthy want, not the Cowboys coach, Kevin McCarthy want, because they want to cut into our Social Security, into our social insurance as a way to funnel more money into Wall Street. And at the same time, he's saying Biden's siding with Wall Street because I guess Wall Street is so woke, right? That they just only care about diversity, inclusion, and climate change. But Biden is gonna veto this, right? But that's not really the end point for this, right? Like, they're ramping this up after they've already passed the bill through the House and the Senate. They're going to try to use this as a PR campaign to then attack the administrative state, as you write about in the New Republic.
Yeah, and I've been tracking this sort of anti-ESG movement, broadly defined, for about a year, and for a while was very confused about where it was coming from, just because it's not clear sort of who's benefiting from this, or like why Republicans would particularly care about this obscure sort of sustainable investment acronym, or pension funds, which they, as you pointed out, routinely vote to dismantle. And routinely make decisions at the state and the federal level, which disadvantage retirees and retiree pension funds. And as I write in the piece, and as you noted, I think the only sort of thing I can make sense for what the prize of this is, which is not really to like disempower BlackRock in any meaningful way. Like it's they have $10 trillion of assets under management roughly. And so, the amount of like these small state pension funds sort of withdrawing funds is that, seems not totally negligible, but not really the main prize here. But as you say, there is this sort of way that state level policy making happens increasingly, where it's easy for relatively small amounts of donor money to fund these sort of campaigns that can go national in the way that the American Legislative Exchange Council has done with a number of issues. So you can look at their sort of militancy against abortion, right to work, has followed a sort of similar playbook to what you're seeing with anti-ESG, and can galvanize these big sort of national level fights by enlisting states as kind of the foot soldiers within that. And particularly with this, because so much of the focus is on energy, they're looking at these sort of states who have historically relied a lot on extractive industries, like West Virginia, Kentucky, red states that have been really leading the charge in this from their attorneys general and state treasurers' offices, and just use that to galvanize this big fight. And what I think that fight is, as we're seeing now, is against the administrative state. So the first thing we have seen at the sort of federal level on this is this vote against this Department of Labor regulation, which all this regulation does is sort of allow pension funds to consider ESG. It doesn't mandate anything. It doesn't sort of make it so that these funds have to look at these sets of priorities, just establishes that is an okay thing for them to do if they would like to. But it's a target in part because it's a very convenient way to go after the rulemaking authority of federal agencies, and to say that they're overstepping their bounds and going beyond the sort of mandate given to them by Congress, which is exactly the sort of challenge that John Roberts invited in his majority opinion on West Virginia versus EPA this summer, which many people thought would sort of dismantle big chunks of the administrative state, would really kneecap the EPA. It didn't quite do that. But what Roberts does in that decision is to say, here is this sort of very shaky legal precedent called major questions doctrine, which you can use to basically bring a challenge to the administrative state generally on the grounds that major questions doctrine basically holds that federal agencies should only sort of be allowed to do a very narrowly circumscribed set of things as outlined by Congress, and that the Supreme Court is the body which can make the decision as to whether these agencies are overstepping their bounds. So the DOL rule is one example of that. The other one, which will probably come up at some point in the next several months or years, is a challenge to proposed Securities and Exchange Commission ruling on sort of reporting requirements around emissions. And so that, I think, is the main prize. It's like they want a big ruling that will overturn something like, the Chevron doctrine, so one of these big sort of statutes that allows for the state to regulate what these companies do.
I mean, that's Roberts' version of what Thomas was doing in, I guess, the concurring opinion in Dobbs, right? Which is like, here's a roadmap for all the things that you can come to us, and it's just like it's a platter of pick what you want, and you can come. We'll attack affirmative action. We'll attack LGBTQ rights. Whatever you want, state legislatures. This is your roadmap, and then Roberts is just doing it a little bit more subtly, especially because for his purposes, that's the prize, right? The dismantling of the administrative state, as the more like corporate Republican, as opposed to, QAnon believing adjacent guy like Thomas, right? And that's really just immensely concerning. And given the fact that your reporting and who you spoke to at this conference that you were at, these oil and gas executives, given that their public position on things like ESG is very, PR careful, and they're saying that they support it, but behind the scenes, they're clearly attempting to dismantle it because they want things like tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act because, like, hey, we're trying to be green, right? We're a part of this solution too, but behind the scenes working with these Republican groups most likely to help in their efforts to overturn these kinds of things. Like, state Republicans have to know that this money is out there. If they need a kind of fund for their legal efforts to get rid of these regulations, they seem to see this ESG culture war wokeness stuff as a foot in the door.
Yeah, it's a very convenient line, and I think the role of the oil and gas industry here is interesting because they do genuinely have, sort of a legitimate business interest in pursuing things like carbon capture and storage, which they have some sort of personnel expertise in. They have some of the sort of, technology and infrastructure to do that, and, are very excited about some of the tax breaks offered. At the same time, they always want to have it both ways. And so you'll see people like the CEO of ExxonMobil, Darren Woods, or any of these big oil and gas CEOs saying, we're so excited to, lead the way toward a low carbon transition to what? Nobody really knows. And then at the same time, through their membership in trade associations like the American Petroleum Institute, in some cases through, the CEO of Devon Energy sits on the board of one of these organizations, is really pushing forward anti-ESG and spouts more of the sort of crude climate denial than we'll see typically these days. But they want to have it both ways, right? They want both the sort of reputational benefits of being invested in the energy transition, which will win them friends among investors, and they want to take the tax credits, and they want to not be beholden to any sort of federal regulation at all. And, that's been their playbook for a long time. And for the most part, they can do it.
This is a bit of an aside, but in hindsight, and I know that with the Inflation Reduction Act, we were kind of being held over a barrel by Manchin, but we should not have been incentivizing things like carbon capture, probably, right, from the United States, because for these oil and gas companies, like, I understand that it has its value, but for oil and gas companies, is it not a way for them to have it both ways, or am I overstepping there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a sort of complicated issue. I think what is definitely true is that oil and gas companies are treating carbon capture and storage, in particular now, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act, as a way to say, we're on the right side, we can handle this problem. We are best positioned to lead the way to a clean energy future. But when you look at what they're actually spending, they're spending such modest amounts on carbon capture and storage. They're nice little, now sort of tidy lanes of revenue, but they've reaped the reputational benefits. They sort of allow, people to think that they're really sort of green and cleaning up their act. But they're investing such little money in it, which, I personally think carbon capture and storage is a sort of important technology. Like, I think this is something that we will probably need. Most sort of climate modeling says we will need some significant level of it. I just don't trust these companies to do it because they're not spending very much money on it, and there's just not a profit model, right? The whole model of carbon capture and storage is that you get carbon from the sort of atmosphere through direct air capture or through industrial processes through carbon capture and storage, like attaching things onto industrial operations, and then you just keep it in the ground. Like, there's nothing. There's not really a revenue model for that, and should be a public good if we think it's so important, because we can't, just trust companies to make money off this thing that, like, is a bad way to make money, which is the only thing that they know how to do.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So some of the executives you spoke to about the anti-ESG push here, what were some of the most interesting responses that you got, if you were able to glean anything from, like, the neat and tidy way that they're going to present to the public?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I don't really think they're being so disingenuous here, because the thing that I have heard oil and gas executives say, and people in the industry and sort of trade publications say for a while, is that the reason that there has not been more investment in oil and gas production in particular over the last several years is that they spent 10 years losing money on the shale boom. They just drilled as much as possible, hemorrhaged investors' cash, and drove down the price of oil to the point where none of them were really making money, especially in the shale patch. And so the reasons why their investors have been a bit more leery to say, go out and drill, go fetch these, $100 per barrel prices, is because they, misbehaved. They spent 10 years misbehaving and losing money. And what the anti-ESG movement says is very different from that. They say the reason there is not more oil and gas production happening, because we, value that as some sort of moral good to be drilling for oil and gas, is because these woke investors are going around and telling poor ExxonMobil, poor Chevron that they can't drill because of the Green New Deal or something. And then you actually just ask executives whether, Larry Fink pulling some green string is the problem and why they're not pouring more money into exploration and production. And they say no. It's not a sort of narrative that like makes intuitive sense. And they're pretty clear about that. Like if anyone is actually paying attention to the sort of business press or what actual people in industry are actually saying, they will not say that the problem is like, these woke investors peddling some green agenda. They'll say we're getting our balance sheets back in order and we're actually profitable and making money for the first time, and we want to keep that up, which they're true. They're not lying when they say that. But at the same time, this anti-ESG fight is very convenient, and so that even if they disagree with the basic premise of the argument or one of the basic premise of the argument, they are still, perfectly willing to chase something that could mean they don't have to report emissions, that they don't have to, abide by federal rules.
You also did some reporting on their kind of reaction to the Inflation Reduction Act more broadly, right? And their praise for it publicly. What's your sense now that the Democrats have lost the majority in the House of how some of these executives are feeling, and how that kind of pairs with this new ESG push, which as we went or anti-ESG push, which as we went over, Biden was clearly going to veto it. The veto brings more press to it. Then it's an opportunity for these attorneys general on the state level to do their thing and go after the EPA and its statutory authority and all that. But in terms of that piece of legislation, what would you say is the broad kind of consensus reaction among some of these executives?
I think there's two major strains. The first being the less important, I think, which is that there are things, especially the very large oil and gas producers are already doing, like carbon capture and storage, like sort of very nascent investments in hydrogen, in the sort of suite of technologies that are being incentivized by the Inflation Reduction Act, that they can, what's known as de-risk, right? And so the government will sort of shoulder the risk of those operations while they reap the reward. And so it's just more profitable and easier to get financing for carbon capture and storage products. That's a nice little revenue stream that they can grow as a nice sort of supplement to their main business, which is drilling and selling hydrocarbons. But I think the major reason why they seem so sort of positive about this, and the vibe kind of at this terrible conference I was at, was that it's a sigh of relief, right? There's a moment where they thought that there might be more stringent rules in what they're doing, that there might be more intense regulations, that the Inflation Reduction Act would actually threaten their business model in some way. And that's passed, right? The Democrats lost their majority to divided Congress. It is not going to pass certainly ambitious climate legislation that poses any sort of threat to their business model. And so it's just this big sigh of relief that, we will not, at least for the foreseeable future, have to worry about anyone coming and saying we can't, just continue to drill up as many fossil fuels as possible for as long as we can make money off it. Like, they can do both. They can have the sort of reputational benefits, new revenue streams from these low carbon businesses, and they can continue to drill and sell as many fossil fuels as they want.
All right, well, that's a bit troubling, but Kate Aronoff, I really appreciate your time today. You can read her work over at the New Republic and also read her book, Overheated: How Capitalism Broke the Planet and How We Fight Back. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I already had this conversation earlier this morning with Trita Parsi. We spoke about the Saudi Arabian Iranian normalization agreement brokered by China. It's a great discussion. We'll play that for you, and then when we come back, we'll head into the fun half. We are back, and we are joined now by Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, a favorite of ours here at the Majority Report, here to discuss his latest piece on the Saudi Arabian and Iranian normalization agreement. Trita, thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So this is major. Iran, Saudi Arabia, they've come to a normalization agreement. The parameters are arguably less significant than how the agreement was actually reached and who helped them reach it. It was brokered by China, and there was no United States involvement. Take us through the signage of this agreement last week.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, you're quite right. As it stands right now, this deal in and of itself is smaller than the fact that China stepped in and mediated it. Iran and Saudi Arabia have had good and bad relations, up and down, for many, many different years. And now we've had a 7-year slump, and that seems to have now come to an end. But there's not going to be a love fest. At least the normalization deal in itself doesn't guarantee that. Instead, they're going to continue to be rivals. But because of the normalization, that rivalry is now going to be much better managed. And that hopefully will then mean that they're not going to be recklessly spreading their rivalry throughout the region and turning other countries into an arena for their conflict. So that is fantastic news for most countries in the region, of course, assuming that things will go through as planned. It can lead to something bigger. It can lead to a much bigger strategic shift, but that is a much greater unknown at this point. But the fact that China stepped in and mediated this is extremely significant. Now, the Chinese were not alone. The Iraqis and the Omanis had been mediating and preparing the ground for this since 2019. But they couldn't really push it over the goal line. The Chinese came in and did that. And there were some apparently pretty intense negotiations just in the last couple of weeks, from Xi visiting Riyadh, and then later on Raisi went to Beijing. So the Chinese role seems to have been quite significant, at least towards the end. And this is huge because China has traditionally not desired to play that type of a role in the Middle East. It was almost a given that China would never get itself involved in these different things. And now it has. It's been successful, and it's sending shockwaves, not just in the Middle East, but it's also raising question marks as to whether China's proposed mediation in Ukraine should be taken far more seriously than it was 2 or so weeks ago when it was first proposed and very quickly dismissed by Western powers.
Well, that dismissal it colors it entirely differently, right? Because there's some parallels with this situation here, where the United States has been unable to mediate any kind of relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran because it is so hawkish on Iran, right? They do not have really a leg to stand on from the Iranians' perspective. Now, Russia invaded Ukraine. It's an asymmetrical situation, but at the same time, China is positioning itself as a more neutral diplomatic power in this way. I mean, what is their end game? Obviously, now they have kind of developed a relationship between these two major oil powers in the region and has cooled tensions between the two, at least for now. What do you see as their the goal of their kind of shift on past history of diplomacy or lack thereof?
So let me address the goals second. Let me first talk about what you addressed first in your question, which is, how come the US couldn't do it and the Chinese could? It's not just that the US is being very hostile towards Iran and vice versa. It's also what Khalid Eljabri and I write in Foreign Affairs yesterday. It's also because the United States, both under Trump and under Biden now, has been completely deferential to the Saudis. We're trying to hug MBS to death. So we lost credibility in the region, partly because we're part of all of these different conflicts instead of being neutral. And then secondly, because we've just completely bent over backwards for some of these states, which has then further embroiled us in their conflicts and further undermined any credibility we had to mediate. Now, I don't think that the United States easily could have mediated between Iran and Saudi Arabia in the first place. We could have, had Trump not pulled out of the JCPOA and we actually had 7 years of steadily improving relations with Iran, then it could be in a very different universe than we are right now. But obviously, Trump made sure that that didn't happen. But I think it goes beyond Iran and Saudi Arabia. The United States is not a trusted mediator in most parts of the Middle East. It's not just Iran and Saudi Arabia. And part of that is because
Israel-Palestine.
Israel-Palestine is the biggest example. I was going to get to that because we've actually made a point out of not being neutral. Remember back in the 1990s, Al Gore got a lot of criticism because he at some point had said that we would be an honest broker in the Middle East. It was some of the most hawkish pro-Israel voices that attacked him and said, no, America's going to be on the side of Israel. It's not going to be an honest broker. Honest broker means that we're neutral. We're not neutral. We shouldn't be neutral. Well, guess what? Not being neutral has meant over a course of years now that we've lost any credibility to be a trusted mediator. And perhaps we didn't see that as a particularly costly position because we were the only games in town. Now there is another game in town. And now suddenly we're seeing the cost of the United States branding itself as a partisan actor in the region, as someone who's on this, it's not mediating, it's essentially Saudi Arabia's lawyer in the mediation between the Saudis and the Houthis. It's not an honest broker. We don't want to be an honest broker. Well, guess what? That's going to cost us a lot now because now the Chinese are stepping in. Now, what do the Chinese want? Well, first and foremost, countries do all of these different things because it's in their own interests. I wish we did it more that way, because if we're acting our own interest, there's so much in the Middle East and elsewhere that we wouldn't be doing. But China's doing this out of its own interest, and its key interest is that it needs to have stability in the Middle East because half of its energy is coming from the Middle East. And growing its economy, bringing millions of Chinese out of poverty is the most important objective for the Chinese. By stepping in and reducing the tension between the Saudis and the Iranians, it's stabilizing oil markets, it's reducing the risk premium, and it's good for its economy. But it's also probably doing it for one other reason, or many other reasons, but one that I would want to mention is the fact that the Chinese are also doing this because it brings Iran and Saudi closer to them. And if US-Chinese tensions continue to rise, which they have been since the Trump years and continued under Obama, the Chinese want to make sure that in such a scenario, the United States is not going to be able to put pressure on Saudi Arabia to seize its energy relations with China, for instance. They want to have a guarantee by bringing the Saudis closer to them. And by doing this, they're also showing that China can be a constructive player on the international scene, which will make it much more difficult for the United States to brand China as a threat to the global order, as the new pacing threat that we have to go into a Cold War against. So China's doing it for its own reasons, obviously. What I think took everyone by surprise is the speed and the competence in which they managed to shift from being a country that stays out of these things to a country that is stepping in, mediating, and bringing it to a close.
Well, as you say, I mean, they were uniquely situated to do so based on their economic prowess and the fact that they were relatively neutral and had interest in this situation. And the United States has completely gotten rid of its credibility in the region. It's been, and Murtaza Hussain wrote about this in The Intercept, that the United States' role as an enforcer for, say, Saudi Arabia or Israel has not just burned its credibility with other countries, but it has also incentivized the countries that we have close relationships with to pursue aggressive military conquest or aggression, apartheid in Israel's instance, on their own, because we were their enforcer behind the scenes. So it isn't just our impartiality that has created and helped exacerbate this mess, some of the messes that we see, but it's just the nature of how the U.S. wields power, which is very different than this kind of soft power strategy from China, one that I would wish the United States would pursue. And I think clearly demonstrating here that if your stated objective is actually coming to some sort of agreement, it's much more effective, obviously.
Yeah, and those two things are very connected, of course, because it is our desire not to be impartial, which also means that we have given carte blanche to many of the states in the region to do whatever they want. And when they get themselves into trouble, which they invariably do, they count on us to have an obligation to come and bail them out. And that's what we've done with the Saudis in Yemen. That's what we're continuously doing as Israel continues to expand its occupation, illegal settlements, erode its own democracy in the process. None of this, in my view, would really been able to happen had we not enabled it to happen by thinking that we're actually doing them a favor by supporting such policies that they're pursuing. In fact, a key reason as to why Saudi Arabia has shifted towards diplomacy with Iran is precisely because under Trump, they got a wake-up call because the Iranians attacked Saudi oil fields. The Saudis expected the United States to come and bomb Iran in retaliation as part of a long-standing policy dating back to the Carter years, the Carter Doctrine. And Trump explicitly said, I'm not going to go to war with Iran on behalf of Saudi Arabia. This was another moment of shock in Saudi Arabia, and they suddenly realized they can't hide behind American power as they could before. Well, if you can't hide behind America's military might, guess what? Diplomacy with your neighbors suddenly become much more attractive. And in that sense, our policy has actually been an obstacle to the regional diplomacy that we now are seeing happening for the last couple of years. And the reason why it's happening again is because more and more states have become convinced we are leaving the region. Even if we keep military forces in the region, we don't have the appetite to fight in or for the region. And as a result, they can't hide behind us, and they need to resolve their own tensions themselves and build their own security with their neighbors themselves. And guess what? That's actually a really good thing. Not just for them, it's good for us as well. All we need to do now is to encourage it more, make sure that it moves in a stable way instead of being disruptive, and bring American troops home.
But the fear probably from the Biden administration is that, oh my gosh, our major buddy that we've completely, bent over backwards to, kiss the ring of MBS or bump the fist rather, they are becoming close to our arch rival. And the United States has been, and I think, we've done a few interviews on this, I'm immensely concerned that the Biden administration's being reckless in its China hawkery with these deals with Australia, the reopening of military bases in the Philippines, the consistent hawkishness to drum up this rivalry. I mean, that I would imagine also motivates China. But when it comes to the Saudis, why are Biden's appeals that are embarrassing, honestly, from a progressive perspective, where he says we're going to make Saudi Arabia a pariah state and then he's cozying up to MBS? Why are they falling on deaf ears with Saudi Arabia? Like, why has the regime in Saudi Arabia, despite the U.S.'s consistent, forgiving of its misdeeds and human rights abuses, choosing to kind of say, well, I want to dance with another?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And it goes back to what we talked about before. First, you have the US say, hey, we're not going to fight for you. And then the Saudis start, so well, then they have to start looking elsewhere. They're doing diplomacy with Iran. They're moving closer to China. Then we got a panic. Somewhere in the summer after the withdrawal of Afghanistan, there was a major change happening in the White House. originally there were plans to actually withdraw a significant amount of troops from the Middle East. Then that suddenly was completely changed. And the winning argument in the NSC was, well, we're going to have this major confrontation or competition with the Chinese. And that competition is not going to take place in the South China Sea alone. It's going to take place in Africa, in Europe, in Latin America, and in the Middle East. And as a result, we cannot withdraw troops. We cannot weaken our relations with these partners, however problematic those relations have been. Instead, we have to double down on them in order to make sure that in the competition with China, we take advantage of what the White House saw as our main strength, which is this alliance system. Take a look at what Colin Kahl, Deputy Secretary of Defense, said at one of his speeches in IISS. He said that the competition with China is not a competition between two states. It's a competition of alliances, coalitions. So we really need to bring them closer. That's why we suddenly saw that shift. And it manifested itself in Saudi Arabia in the sense that all the talk about pariah, all the talk about MBS is going to pay for how he's manipulated oil prices, all of that came to nothing. And we did not put pressure on him. Instead, we supported him in many different ways, including in Yemen. And then the question comes to your point. So why didn't the Saudis agree to it? Well, because once we were essentially bending over backwards for MBS, MBS was like, well, why don't you bend over a little bit more? I want formal security guarantees from you, the United States. I want you to commit American women and men to die for my country. So he's not going to meet the Biden team halfway unless he gets that. It's been one of the key demands of the Saudis that they've been repeating. And to Biden's credit, at least I have to say, we've so far not been in the mood of offering that. I mean, that would be a major, major change in U.S. posture. We would, because all of these other beliefs that we had to come to their defense were based on understandings, not formal treaties. Saudi Arabia is not a formal ally of the United States. It's a security partner, but there is no treaty agreement with them. That's what the Saudis are asking for right now. And there is a possibility that this whole normalization with Iran is part of MBS's negotiating tactic with the US, in which he's trying to raise the cost of the United States not offering him written security guarantees. But if he were to do so, and it would be truly formal, it would have to go through the Senate. And I very much doubt that the United States Senate would agree to such an agreement.
Yes. And then when it comes to Iran's position here, I mean, their potential new connection with China has to undercut any kind of upping of the Obama-era nuclear agreement, right? I mean, I know those talks have already been falling flat under Blinken, but any hope? My guess is that this dwindles those kinds of hopes, since, you know, the United States' effort to isolate Iran took a blow with China's involvement here.
It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out on that issue. It has been on ice. It has been on ice for many different reasons. The last round of talks that took place in August of last year, the Iranians came in with last-minute demands that really, unfortunately, caused those talks to collapse. Then you had the uprisings in Iran, and then you had the midterms in the United States. So all of that led to a situation in which talks were put on ice. Then on top of that, the Iranians started supporting Russia in the war in Ukraine. And that all has led to a situation in which the cost for the Biden administration to go back in, the political cost to go back into the JCPOA has significantly increased, particularly the combination of Ukraine and the manner in which the Iranian government has treated its own people over the course of the last couple of months. On top of that, you've had a significant change of heart in Europe. Europe never saw the Iranian nuclear program as an immediate threat. The bigger threat was that we would go to war with Iran over the nuclear program. That was a threat to Europe. So the Europeans stepped in for the diplomacy in order to make sure that that scenario didn't happen. With Iran supporting Russia and the Europeans increasingly seeing Russia as an existential threat to the European order, suddenly their view of Iran has changed dramatically, and Ukraine takes way bigger priority than the nuclear program. So the political mood and the political space for this on the Western side has shrunk significantly. At the same time, there's been no indications that there's a more open attitude to it on the Iranian side. After this normalization deal, however, I think there are reasons to believe that it may potentially change, because this is a blow to any effort to isolate and contain and sanction Iran further. So one of the cards that the US had in their calculation of being able to, at some point when the US itself was ready, which doesn't seem to be the case right now, pressure the Iranians to come back to the table, has now been undermined with this a normalization deal. On the other hand, the Chinese are stepping in and showing that just because the US doesn't have the political space to move forward diplomatically doesn't mean that the Chinese are going to be sitting there on the sidelines and do nothing. So I think there is pressure momentum to do something, but it hasn't changed the political landscape in Washington, which on the US side has been one of the main obstacles. The Biden administration always wanted the deal, but was never really willing to pay the political price for it. If they did, they would have just gone in on day one instead of the strategy that they chose. The sad reality is that the political cost of going in has steadily increased since day one when he came into office. At that moment, it would have been the least politically costly step to take. Now it's much higher. And that's going to continue to remain a decisive factor on determining how the US reacts to this.
It's frustrating. Last question before I let you go. How does this help and alleviate the suffering of the people of Yemen, that we have some sort of normalization?
It hopefully will. At a minimum, we have to recognize that the Yemeni civil war has its own Yemeni roots. But Saudi Arabia and Iran has fueled that conflict by bringing their own rivalry into it. If they now withdraw it, that is good news. Is it sufficient to bring about a complete end to the civil war? We don't know. But it creates a significant opening and an opportunity for that to happen. There already is a truce. That truce has expired, but it's nevertheless largely been abided by. Will this give political momentum to move forward further and turn the truce into something more permanent? That would be one of the best outcomes if it were to happen from this normalization deal.
Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
We are back from our interview with Trita Parsi. With that, we're going to wrap up the first hour of the Majority Report. We're going to be heading into the fun half with Matt Binder, Brandon Sutton, Bradley and Matt, and myself. And we'll take your calls, read your IMs. The number is 646-257-3920. But first, Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
On Tuesday we had Dwayne Monroe on to talk about AI. We also talked about the Silicon Valley Bank sort of failure and the lack of reckoning with how we've basically just decided to paper over the financial crisis with giving a whole bunch of money to speculators, and how that's still unaddressed. I mean, we should regulate these banks too, but we shouldn't be pumping money into this part of the economy anyway. And we also, this weekend, talking to Jamie Peck about Cop City.
Oh, cool.
Yep, Patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
Oh, that's great. And she's down there, right? Still?
I'm not sure if she's still down there. She did a video for Means TV on it, however.
Okay. Well, definitely check that out. That's going to be a great episode. On ESVN, we spoke at length about Lamar Jackson's contract situation, what it means for a player of his caliber to represent himself without an agent, how the union's positioned in this situation, and how the billionaires always win. Plus some March Madness stuff with Will from Indiana, and, Aaron Rodgers' watch We did that on Monday and more things at youtube.com/ESVN show. And, oh, very nice. There's Bradley. Hi. And there's Brandon. We can't hear you.
Oh, we can't hear you, Brandon. Might need to...
I was muted there. Just, had my Zoom meeting settings on.
Well, I mean, that's better than saying something you don't mean. I don't know. What's happening on the discourse?
Yes. I was able to get the last episode out where we talk about our various feelings about Black History Month, and where I was able to predict, maybe a day ahead. So if you were listening to the Discourse premium show infrequently, as it is, you would have known that Signature Bank was going to collapse perhaps a day before it happened. So, that's just a little plug of my foresight. And then we talk a little bit about the 2024 election, what we're expecting, Trump versus DeSantis, etc. Looking forward to a lot more drama, I suppose. Dirty Hands DeSantis.
Exactly. All right. Well, check that out. What's up, Matt Binder? What's happening over on Scam Economy and Doomed?
Hello, everybody. There's a few things happening over at Scam Economy and Doomed. You can check out this week's episode of Scam Economy with my guest, Edward Ongweso Jr. We spoke about the fall of Silicon Valley Bank, the crying, whiny crybaby tech VCs who begged for the government to save them. And we also spoke about the differences and similarities between the fall of Silicon Valley Bank and then the two crypto-friendly banks that also went under this past week, Signature Bank and Silvergate. That's at youtube.com/Matt Binder and scameconomy.com. For Doomed podcast listeners, I have some episodes I have not uploaded yet to the podcast feed for you to check out at doomedcast.com. And Leftist Mafia tonight. You can check that out. And that's what's going on in my world this week.
Awesome. I mean, Slate just keeps hiring some of the really great reporters out there. Like first Alex Salmon gets hired by Slate, and then Edward.
I think this was just a piece that he did for them. He's not officially with Slate.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
But they published it. So I mean, they're picking up some good stuff.
All right. Well, yeah, definitely check that out. We will head into the fun half now. As I mentioned, the number is 646-257-3920. See you there.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Dinner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Dinner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this.
Psych. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you. And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. Thank you, Matt, for calling into the phones for me. Well, let me turn off the voicemail. So if you want to call in, you should be able to. Daredevil says, Emma, please ask Binder about the revelation that he was a part of the January 6th insurrection. There was photographic evidence.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, I guess the jig is up. I've been outed. I was there. Yeah. I was the one handing out the weapons. I was dressed as a ninja because, that's my go-to. I mean,
you're Antifa.
No, right, this is a limited hangout. Actually, Binder was there to gang stalk Chaya Raichik.
Right, yes. I knew who she was then. I was onto her.
You saw that ring and you knew that's Chaya.
Right, yep. Yeah. For people who don't know, I came across some random Twitter user who shared video of people inside the Capitol building on January 6th. And they were suggesting that it was Antifa who was there, which has been a trope among the right. But this specific Twitter user was claiming that one of the people suspiciously looked like me, naming me. And then they were like, I guess it'll all come out soon enough.
Yeah.
Like, at first I thought it was a joke, maybe. I had to read it a few times. But then that last line, the ominous, I guess it'll all come out soon enough. That person was serious as can be.
Yeah.
Well, I have to presume he means when Trump eventually drains the swamp, you'll be the first on the list.
Right. Yes.
And also, I mean, you wear black a lot. There's no written proof that you're not in Antifa. So I just have to assume that you are.
Right. I mean, people have no idea whether or not I go to the Antifa headquarters in Brooklyn, New York, and visit the Queens branch every now and then as well. People have no idea whether I do that or not. They'll never know.
It must be pretty demoralizing to be being sentenced to 5 years in prison for macing a Capitol Hill police officer, only for your political compatriots to be like, that guy Antifa, all made up. He's not even going to jail. False flag.
That's
stolen valor. Stolen valor.
You know what though? The Antifa thing though, I wish we could go back to the Antifa thing being their main go-to instead of the guy, a guy being in jail for literally beating a Capitol police officer with a stick over the head over and over again. And then Tucker Carlson shows some video of some other guys just walking, a cherry pick video of some other guys just walking through the hallway without doing anything violent. And that guy who's in jail going, maybe I didn't do that violent act I did. They're literally rewriting what they did. Because Tucker Carlson is telling them they didn't do it. I wasn't violent. Tucker Carlson was right. What's going on here?
I mean,
they should have gone with hypnosis.
There's a lot of instances of people who were violent who then have this incredible cognitive dissonance and just hey, I was justified and I wasn't really doing that. So that's what Daddy Tucker's providing for them.
It's mob mentality.
They're not even going with the justified thing. They're literally going with, I wasn't violent, actually. I didn't do that.
I think they should have said they were hypnotized, like Antifa hypnotized them into acting that way. But yeah, no, I think, this is mob mentality at action too, but we all know the real type of dangerous mob, the internet hate mob. So let's not lose track of that.
Right. The woke mob.
The woke mob.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of woke, Dago Lefty, Emma, I didn't expect the jump from using the term woke to being explicitly anti-people of color. I noticed the wake of these banks collapsing, conservatives now new favorite pastime is to scroll through the board of directors to find the one person who is slightly tanned to blame it on the collapse. Look, I tweeted easy shorthand to understand when people say they're anti-woke is just substitute wokeness for blackness, and I got a lot of pushback, a lot of critique of that. But I think
by
it's
the anti-woke freaks that are like actually secretly bigots.
Well, I mean, you've said this to me before. Like, there's just a kind of way more people that shit on me in my replies, I feel like, than my other colleagues. But I think it's gotten worse since Elon's taken over, and I also think that my public critique of Taibbi is attracting this new cohort of people that are going after that. But I mean, I think it's fairly indisputable.
I feel like two things actually. The first is I feel like my clout has just been down since Elon Musk took over. I'm not getting the kind of engagement that I want. And I suspect it's because in order for him to get as much engagement artificially as he gets, he has to take it from somewhere. It's a zero-sum game. So, if eyeballs are on his tweet, they aren't on someone else's, i.e. mine. But that's neither here nor there. It's an observation. It's an observation. I mean, hey, maybe a scientific one, but
something people should look into.
I think that the woke thing, it definitely started off as explicitly black, but I think it grew to be an even more nebulous term as people started to also use it to encompass that what used to be just SJWs, because the sort of the group that we used to describe as college SJW blue hair types, and that just shows really how nebulous descriptor it's become, because some people still mean it in its anti-black way specifically, and some people now mean it in its just general anti-zoomer college student online way. But at the core of it, we know where it started with, we know where it started with beyond the sort of black people using it amongst themselves, but it started as right-wing groups online, essentially mocking the ways in which black people describe staying aware of fucking structural racism. And what people want you to do is forget that that's where they're deriving that term from. It's not the way that black people use it, it's the way that far right demagogues make fun of black people for using it. And then an expansion of that to be all groups who just want to be treated better.
But right. even the cultural use of it has gotten it always has been, obviously, but even that, you had mentioned, they used to just describe Zoomers or whatever, but even when you see people using that word outside of politics, it's always just oh, black person in movie, cast in movie. Oh, it's a woke movie now. Oh, it's a woke movie now. It's obvious. It's so obvious what they mean by it.
It feels like it's now the antithesis to American racist nostalgia. Anything that goes against what people who are in their let's just be honest, any age now, it's not even older people. It's people who pretend they can harken back to a 1950s that just simply didn't exist. Anything that stands in contrast to their imagined version of what America should or used to be is now described as woke. It's there are women in college now, that's woke. And that's how it's it's the term of ideologues, people who haven't been forced to actually carve out the boundaries on what it does and doesn't encompass, and it's just used as a scapegoat for all the things wrong with or rather all things they perceive to be wrong with the modern world and how it negatively affects them.
Being anti-woke is a rebranded lost cause thing. Honestly, right? So but
yeah, I mean, where did all that sentiment go?
Yes.
Brandon, you had mentioned social justice warriors, SJWs, and it's interesting because that vernacular is gone. Yeah, it's gone.
Because I think it's gone because it was at this, by the time we got post Gamergate 2016, it was just synonymous with right-wing online circles, where woke has been, I think, more readily adopted by just people maybe this just shows how far we've come since the SJW was adopted, but like it seems like woke is used more by people in the real media all the time, like uncritically. They just uncritically use the word without defining it, without making anyone else define it, without like explaining its origins as a word. They just like go, yep, this is woke. Like, new woke law and scare quotes as like the New York Post headlines. And, it's just that's just a part of our public intellectual sphere that people don't like actually demand anyone define their terms now. But, you just see it more and more with these kinds of like dog whistles.
Well, and that woman, Bethany
Mandel.
I guarantee you she's gone on a right-wing talk shows to promote her book and said the same thing, that same sentence over and over about wokeness. And it was the first time that she got any pushback when on Rising they said, Brianna said that, can you define wokeness? It's just the simplest question, and that's what caused her to short circuit, because this ecosystem, there's nobody asking anyone to define it.
Well, far-right groups want you to be confused about what they're talking about explicitly. That's how you end up with people going to the January 6th rally and being like, I just thought it was a free speech thing, or like the Charlottesville rally, and like, just earnestly, if misguidedly, thinking it's a free speech thing, because they want you to be confused about the terms that they use. They want you to think that they mean one thing while they mean the other. And that's why, people who are intellectually curious or rigorous will oftentimes be like, oh, can you define that for me real quick? Can you tell me a little bit about that word or that book you're reading or that person you're talking about beyond just what like it explicit shallow reading of it? But in right-wing circles, they want you to be like, they want people to be able to imprint whatever they want on that word, because they're afraid of explicitly saying the racist or bigoted thing and spooking the suckers, essentially, just like what Donald Trump was going to do in the Republican Party. You get afraid if you say like what woke or anti-woke really means, that you're going to be, scaring off the people who are just not as racist as you need them to be fully aligned with all of your fascist goals.
Let's do this Tucker Carlson, DeSantis, Trump saga. This is a bit of a longer prelude and setup, but I'm curious about your guys' thoughts on this, on Ukraine here. So Tucker Carlson sent out a questionnaire to all of the potential presidential candidates about their views on the war in Ukraine and Russia's invasion. And DeSantis's response here is interesting. Let's just set that up and so we asked Mike Pence and Trump and all that, right? And he refers to, in this response, the Russian war in Ukraine as a, quote, territorial conflict.
The most newsworthy response that we received was from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. DeSantis has well-known views on many topics, of course, but until tonight, no one could really say with precision where he stood on the war in Ukraine, which is arguably the most important topic in the world. And now we know. DeSantis is adamantly opposed to the position that most Republicans in Washington have taken on Ukraine. DeSantis is not a neocon. Who knew? Quote, Well, the U.S. has many vital national interests, DeSantis writes, securing our borders, addressing the crisis of readiness within our military, achieving energy security and independence, and checking the economic, cultural, and military power of the Chinese Communist Party. Becoming further entangled in a territorial dispute between Ukraine and Russia is not one of them. Without question, he writes, peace should be the objective. The U.S. should not provide assistance that could require the deployment of American troops or enable Ukraine to engage in offensive operations beyond its borders. F-16s and long-range missiles should therefore be off the table. These moves would risk explicitly drawing the United States into the conflict and drawing us closer to a hot war between the world's two largest nuclear powers. That risk is unacceptable. DeSantis goes on to oppose the policy of regime change in Moscow, which is very popular in Washington, and he points out that the Biden administration has created an alliance between Russia and China, and that's a disaster for the United States.
Okay, so he's not a neocon, except we have to be combating the Chinese Communist Party, and
then also he goes, why are the Chinese friends with Russia now and not us?
Who would have thunk? It's ridiculous, but it's also interesting because DeSantis's response sounds new and familiar, right? And Trump kind of pointed this out. This is at least Trump attempting to take credit for it as he ramps up his own or he changes the Cold War from a hot war in his attack on DeSantis. He says that he's following what I am saying. It is a flip-flop. He was totally different. Whatever I want, he wants. Even if his book was very nice.
Well, both these guys are full of shit because DeSantis and Trump both encouraged increased weapons in Ukraine. But also, this sounds familiar because this is Joe Biden's position on both F-16s and long-range missiles. So, like, this is all phony. Like, okay, you support Brandon then, like, not you, Brandon, but Dark Brandon, because he's also said, yeah, we're not going to do the F-16s. That's not the priority we need to help them with, and the long-range missiles. So, like, you just took the things off the table that Biden and Lloyd Austin already took off the table.
Well, it's funny too because he's trying to differentiate himself from people like Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham who were criticizing these comments.
And he's trying to make, like, Glenn Greenwald's doing this full court press that Gitmo Ron is the new anti-imperialist too, but again, this is just the position that Biden has had, and yeah, it doesn't address that both him and Trump encourage the flight of weapons that they're now supposedly the ones against that sort of activity now.
But this is Tucker's attempt to boost DeSantis, right? We know
that's all it is.
We know how Tucker feels about Trump behind the scenes because of the Discovery and the Dominion lawsuit. And we know that this has been Tucker's hobby horse to get this on the voters' minds in the Republican base, that we should be very pro Putin, and that the war in Ukraine is an existential threat to us here domestically because he has the politics of austerity, and because since we're sending weapons abroad, that affects regular taxpayers at home. It's not a leftist critique of weapon sales. But why this is notable here is Trump did call it a flip-flop, but it was a flip-flop. This is audio of DeSantis in 2015 speaking with radio host Bill Bennett about assistance after the annexation of Crimea.
Reports too of putting troops and arms in Ukraine and in neighboring NATO countries. Is that a good thing to do?
Well, we in the Congress have been urging the president, and I've been, to provide arms to Ukraine. Right. They want to fight their good fight. They're not asking us to fight it for them, and the president has steadfastly refused. And I think that that's a mistake. I think that when someone like Putin sees Obama being decisive, I think that whets his appetite to create more trouble in the area. And I think if we were to arm the Ukrainians, I think that would send a strong signal to him that he shouldn't be going any further. But I'm not optimistic that the administration will listen to us.
Yeah.
Anyway. Point is, all of these guys they're all full of shit, but yeah, I just wanted to point that out because he's not a consistent anti-war or anti-interventionist voice.
Listen. When it's just Russia taking over a tiny portion of Ukraine, then it's a big fucking deal. All out war, we gotta go straight at them. But if it's Russia trying to, take over the whole of Ukraine, obviously the stakes are much lower. So we could just step back and let it slide.
Yeah, like I still, it's so funny that these people want to be like, well, see, Obama, we're just taking the position Obama took a while ago. It's like, yeah, that you savaged him for and called him a pussy, for not and it's like, I think the Obama position was salutary. I think it is good of him. I also think while I think that hesitancy to involve yourself in war, that should be our guiding principle. But it also changed things when Russia did the wider invasion and started marching towards Kiev.
It's also interesting that DeSantis's two biggest worries, interestingly enough, are two things that aren't happening nor close to happening, and neither involves any worry about what Russia is doing or will do. His two worries are U.S. sending over our own troops, not happening, at least right now, as far as this is concerned. And then the second thing is Ukraine moving outside their border to fight, which again, something that's not happening and is nowhere close to happening either right now. His two worries are divorced from reality and have nothing to do with the invading party in Russia.
It's also like the Biden position, and like rest assured that DeSantis is only taking the positions because of his campaign coming up, and that he's far removed from any sort of actual position of responsibility on that, or otherwise, I think Gitmo Ron, the Guantanamo Bay torture laundering lawyer, would not be so anti-war. That's just absurd, and you're just doing a campaign contribution when you act like this is sincere.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Oh, no, I was going to say this is totally transparent. I mean, he's not anti-war. We don't have any anti-war candidates in the United States of America at the presidential level. Maybe Bernie sometimes, maybe. But I think, again, we're talking about something a little bit different here. Because essentially he has not stepped away from providing, more or less any Republican candidate hasn't stepped away from providing unlimited funding for the military-industrial complex, selling weapons to Ukraine in a way that allows the war to be propagated infinitely into a quagmire. He doesn't have any peace plan in the works. He's not really trying any of that stuff. I would say this does remind me of 2016 Trump, though, among other things. And Biden obviously came out because this is just a right-wing nativist position that we have better things to be spending money on at home than the war. Back in 2016 primaries, it was Trump parading over the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, how much of a boondoggle it was, both to get at the Republican Party, status quo politicians, specifically because he was the only one really taking this position, the only one who was saying these sorts of things, but also just to poke fun at Jeb Bush. And so I think that is a very attractive line to go down, especially now that we have a lot more of the QAnon sort of online Republicans who feel these kinds of nativist positions without really thinking them through. But I just don't believe him. It would be great if Ron DeSantis was for peace in Ukraine and between Ukraine and Russia. That would be really nice. But he'll say this. Maybe he won't win the president. I won't even pretend like that's going to happen. But he says this. He becomes president. He raises the military spending budget to $18 trillion, half of which is going to Israel, half of which is going to Ukraine at that point. So, and then there's another a few billion in black money funds for our wars in Africa. But there's no way. It's not there's no way it doesn't continue. It's
Saudi Arabia will get some funds too.
I want to react to something in the chat. Daniel Stewart probably wouldn't have been marching on Kiev if we had been sending more weapons earlier. So this is your retroactive critique. Obama was wrong, and we actually should have been flooding the zone with cash. And I think no, I think they probably would have invaded and have even more justification for it. I think that is I don't know. Maybe you guys look back on this wrongly, but even knowing what we know now, are you supportive of Obama's say the reaction to the Crimea invasion? And I am too. And I don't think that that is a complete counterfactual, and Putin's belligerence on this front, no one foresaw it for the most part, except for the Biden intelligence wing when he was in power. But it was a month before when they foresaw this invasion of Ukraine. It was not something that could have been predicted at that time period. So I disagree with that critique entirely. But this is what it comes back to what we were talking about with Ro Khanna cozying up to David Sachs, libertarian buddy of Peter Thiel, because they have common ground on Yemen and anti-war positions. The libertarian right-wing position that is pushed by Tucker Carlson, people now, I guess, Ron DeSantis is going to cosplay as it. It is not a tenable position. It is one that is based in our taxpayer dollars aren't worth going over to support these savages in other countries for liberation. We need to bring that home and talk about cuts, but they never actually do end up cutting the military industrial complex because we don't have the political will in this country to do that. They just use that to bring people to their side so they can push broader austerity measures, and then in the end not end up touching the military industrial complex and just leaving those mechanisms in place for the next big bad like China. So being hawkish towards China does not make you anti-war, and the fact that Tucker Carlson is trying to square that circle, says everything you need to know about the libertarian anti-war position. All right, let's
Speaking
take
of DeSantis, though, maybe we should, while we're on him, maybe we should talk about an even grosser thing coming from him, and that is apparently how this guy eats pudding.
All right.
Unbelievable. Really, the most disturbing thing about DeSantis I think I've heard yet.
I gotta say, I don't know why this is. I don't know why we talk about this. I don't give a shit about this at all. I'm sorry to pour cold water, but I do not give a fuck. We have this guy reportedly like in the room when people are having Ensure forced down their throats, but he eats pudding
with his fingers.
Well, I mean, I think regular people hear this and they're going to question what the fuck is going on there. Why would you eat pudding with your fingers? It's very weird. People like to pay attention to weird things, you know, and if this is something that hooks people onto how weird of a guy DeSantis is.
No, maybe he wants to eat pudding
out there. Yeah.
Force fed in a tube down his throat. Maybe that would be easier for him.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, no. So he ate pudding with his
fingers. 3 fingers. Scooping up pudding with 3 fingers.
Who reports this? The Daily Beast, naturally. I mean, of course they do. Enshrined in the DeSantis lore is an episode from 4 years ago during a private plane trip from Tallahassee to Washington, D.C. in March of 2019. DeSantis enjoyed chocolate pudding dessert by eating it with 3 of his fingers, according to 2 sources familiar with the incident. Oh, man. Yeah. I mean, he's gross, but perhaps, like...
But I think this is also a key point in your theory, Emma, about, like, that he's just, like, weird.
Yeah.
And, like, maybe not as marketable as every conservative pundit who wants...
No, but that's the broader piece there in the Daily Beast. Like, we could obviously have fun with this pudding thing, but the broader piece is from people who have worked directly with him, saying that this guy's going to have real problems connecting on the campaign trail because he's just a weirdo. And this is coming from people who've worked with him, who ostensibly have the same politics of him, who I'm assuming are Donald Trump supporters, and that's why this stuff is coming out.
Yeah.
But anyway, I mean, that's an issue when you're in election season. This is like the stuff that honestly some people hear, and it makes them think twice about it. I think it's stupid as hell, but that's America, baby.
I don't think anyone's thinking about this, Bender. And no one in the Republican primary is reading the Daily Beast.
The thing where he pronounces thigh food on dates. Like, no one gives a shit about this anymore.
Well, I know I'm actually inclined to say this stuff helps him with the Republican Party base, like eating with your hands, like being unable to pronounce words. Like that's the kind of thing that really I imagine.
No,
that's like the petty bigotry of low expectations.
No. Or Brandon, I'll go further. It's not that he was unable to pronounce Thai food. It was he was mispronouncing it to test women if they would challenge him and then leave the date. So that's actually even a bigger boon for the Republican voter. You want to...
Yeah, that's alpha techniques.
Yes, right. Like Andrew Tate's probably teaching that right now in prison.
It just seems like it's taken from like how they choose contestants for like reality dating shows.
Yeah, right. On Next, I tell every woman that it's Thai food, and then I leave. Next.
I mean, everybody should know. Like my thing is like I'm not going to talk about DeSantis without talking about the Ensure thing, and like him being in the room while Guantanamo detainees are tortured. Like that should be that's like. To be honest, this is the only reason this is interesting is because it's an opportunity to talk about.
I think it's good to know how weird our politicians are because our media seems to do like across like various levels of evil to like petty, like a lot to put forth the pretension that they're normal. Like, and you saw a lot of that when like Trump was giving speeches, and if you watched the speeches, they went through like it was unintelligible, basically, glass houses, but unintelligible. He would go off on long rambling tirades about like water pressure and showers, and then he would maybe go back around to immigration like 15 minutes later. And if you read like the Cliff Notes version in the news, it'd be like totally normal speech. He gave some good points about immigration, et cetera, et cetera. So, I'm always in favor of these more tabloid-esque stories to like really hammer home that these people are weird just across the board. They're not really relatable because a lot of our media is just PR for them. A lot of our media is just like, it's not weird that Donald Trump like never shakes hands with anybody. It's not weird that Hillary Clinton pretends to carry around a bottle of hot sauce. None of this stuff is weird. They're totally just you and I.
Or that Klobuchar eats with a comb. This is the Klobuchar. If DeSantis is the Klobuchar of this election cycle, that does not bode well for him. But both of them don't have utensils in place, and so they're using weird mechanisms.
Yeah, Trump recently last year in his like Iowa speeches has highlighted this like provision to make it less taxable for a kid to inherit his parents' farm in like their farm bill, and like he always leads into it by being like, show of hands, who likes their kids?
Yeah.
Like, do you like your kids? Like, who hates their kids?
Yeah, he's teetering on the edge. He's
just like, why is that the inroad?
He's
talking about people's children.
He's edging like his child's hatred, like revealing his child's hatred to the world. He wants to so bad.
You know I
hatred
hate
of
my
his
kids,
children.
right?
Yeah. All right, let's take a call really quickly. Calling from an 805 area code. Who's this? Where you're calling from?
Hi, this is Adam from Manhattan.
Adam from Manhattan. What's on your mind?
I was going to call in about the Signature Bank collapse.
Okay.
So it's been known for many years that Signature Bank finances a lot of predatory landlords. I know their crypto lending, their crypto schemes got a lot of attention, but they've got tens of billions of dollars in predatory landlords. And yeah, this has been written about for years. Even the New York State Attorney General published or revealed some court documents in like 2017 showing this. And one of their predatory landlords happens to be a private equity firm called Sugar Hill Capital Partners, which is one of the biggest buyers of real estate in northern Manhattan over the last like 10 years or so. And one of the reasons I was calling is that, and I was going to call about this last week, but myself and some others who are tenants of this private equity landlord, Sugar Hill Capital Partners, which is financed by Signature Bank. We've been organizing a coalition of tenants across Upper Manhattan to, fight back for repairs and against some fraudulent schemes or scams that the landlord has been trying to pull. They're just truly awful. Last year, or maybe 2 years ago, our landlord was ranked the #1 worst landlord in the city by the New York City Public Advocate. This year or last year, they were ranked #5 or #7. So, they're improving. But yeah, I'd be interested in like what Brandon had to say, because Brandon mentioned earlier how he had some sort of foresight into Signature's collapse, because we've been paying attention to Signature for the last several months, because our landlord, they're financed mainly through Signature Bank, and starting in the fall, they started facing foreclosure. So they're behind on their mortgage payments, which has been, affecting us in several buildings.
On their rent stabilized buildings too, right? I mean, are you in a rent stabilized apartment? Yeah. That's so they can't gouge you.
Yeah.
So they can't gouge you. So they're not paying their mortgages.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, you got it. Like they bought these properties mainly in like 2016, 2018 with the intention of doing everything they could to, push tenants out and flip the buildings. They even part of the New York State Attorney General's court filings on Signature in 2017 showed that Signature made these cheap loans to predatory landlords like Sugar Hill Capital on terms that basically guaranteed that, landlords like this would do whatever they could to push tenants out, push rent-stabilized tenants out, and attract higher-paying tenants. And so they do everything they can to get tenants out. But I think, as you were alluding to, Emma, in 2019, the laws changed, making it harder for them to sort of deploy their business. The laws changed in New York State, strengthening rent-stabilized tenants protections, making it basically impossible for them to deploy their usual business model. But part of what we've seen in our buildings is like there are states, our landlord is basically going on a capital strike. They've basically said, look, you're going to change these laws. You're not going to allow us to, make the profits that
push you out so we can raise rents for new tenants. Yeah.
Yeah. So now they're just saying, we're not going to invest in these buildings. We're going to let them fall apart.
Yep.
And so they're essentially abandoning dozens of buildings. It's affecting thousands of people. They mainly own in Manhattan, Upper Manhattan, but they also own in Lower Manhattan and a lot in Brooklyn, and Queens too, I think.
Yeah.
So the one thing if I could plug, our coalition is called the Tri-Hill Tenant Coalition, TRIHILL. Tri-Hill Tenants Coalition. We're on Twitter.
Okay.
So it's, I don't know Twitter so well, but it's like at Tri-Hill Tenants. If people could like and follow or whatever us on there. And then we have Instagram. Instagram's Tri-Hill Tenants Coalition, I think. That's what I basically wanted to plug. And I was curious to hear what foresight, Ernie, that Brandon could share.
Okay. Well, appreciate the call. We'll hang up now and Brandon can answer, but I'm on your guys' Twitter account and I'll check it out. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, I mean, I think, both myself and Matt should share some insight into this, because a lot of what made me think Signature was going to collapse was its involvement in crypto. And people were calling for it to collapse or calling for its at least lack of solvency or ability to meet its needs for clients for a while now, along with Silvergate. I think Silicon Valley Bank took people by surprise a little bit more. But the answer is that getting involved in crypto to that level is a red flag. And it's a red flag that can be seen, and rather, because crypto is a microcosm, you can look at it as a red flag for the unsustainable nature of other investments across our economy right now. Tech startups are one of them. A lot of tech startups are overinflated. The tech bubble is bursting. And so startups who have been given $80 million to produce an app that tracks workplace project management, 1% more efficient, don't really have a sustainable business model, despite all the ESG stuff that they're talking about now, making them woke. And another part of that bubble is the real estate bubble. I talk about a lot when I'm looking at crypto videos on YouTube. Some of the other scam ads I get, despite for being for crypto, are all types of Airbnb rental scams, house flipping scams, buy whole apartment building scams. And a lot of these banks that are interested in turning around quick profits, along with the various types of money laundering they get up to, are, dipping their toes, are jumping both feet first back into speculative markets, highly inflated markets, and not, hedging those investments very well. So, it's kind of a thing that you're seeing across the entire economy, bubbles bursting. But the three that are most obvious to me are crypto, tech, especially tech startups, and real estate. All of those things have been inflated for a very long time. And a lot of people who are involved in them, even if they should know better, feel like because those bubbles haven't burst completely over the past 14 or so years since the last big one, that it's not a bubble anymore. We're just was it Suzu and his Bitcoin crypto super cycle. We're just in an economic super cycle. Every house is going to keep being worth $1 million in your suburb. Every tech startup is going to keep, 100%ing and being unicorns. And, the economy just doesn't have the capital for that. It's, it's a lot of bad investments are about to be shaken out. It's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
Right. And also a lot of these companies have been basically going around various different regulations and have legal issues on their hands. Speaking of Signature Bank specifically, I've been reading, he's been a guest on Scam Economy a few times, Mike Burgersberg. He recently put out a newsletter about how it seems like Signature Bank, there's been these rumors going around from parties who have been inquiring about acquiring Signature Bank, that the government's telling them that whoever ends up acquiring Signature Bank cannot continue the crypto banking side of the business. And crypto people have been like, oh, the government's trying to stop crypto because they see how it's going to take away from their control with fiat currency and everything. And it's actually, that sounds stupid to begin with, but it's definitely not that, because as Mike Burgersberg's been looking into, it seems like Signature Bank was aware, or should have been aware, of what was going on at FTX, as FTX was a client of theirs and was using the Signet blockchain, which Signature Bank ran, which made them so crypto friendly, used that blockchain to help commingle FTX and Alameda Research's funds, which should have been red flags that the bank either didn't track or didn't flag, so there's going to be some legal issues for Signature Bank too, most likely, due to their role in how FTX played out. So there's a lot of things going on, everything Brandon just said, and some other issues that we don't quite know the full picture of yet too.
Yeah, I mean, banks are highly regulated, and most banks don't want to get involved in like a lot of money laundering accusations or fraud accusations. And then some banks don't mind because they see the business opportunity there. I'm not going to name any banks specifically, but you can guess which ones. And some people just see, some of them are just doing normal predatory lending. And I think Signature Bank was one of those banks that, once you see it touching crypto, you go, oh, this bank doesn't mind, touching dirty money a little bit, because like that's just what the crypto industry is. It's a lot of dirty money sloshing around with, slightly less dirty money, and then, maybe a little bit of clean money. And so if your bank is touching that, if it's offering crypto based loans, despite the fact that like international bodies say crypto is not suited for that, then they're engaging in risky business models. And that's that's a sign for the sharks to start circling. And then those sharks, it causes more sharks to start circling, and then it just goes under.
Right. All right, guys. I just saw the time, so let's do a clip.
Okay.
Apologies. No, it's my fault. So this Ben Shapiro video was circulating a little bit yesterday. He responded to a viewer question. I guess he was doing some sort of Q&A, so it's an informal setting. And the viewer asked actually a fairly decent question for a viewer that's probably on the conservative side about how alleviating child poverty should be a goal, and that school lunches might help solve that goal. But here's Ben Shapiro answering the question, kind of dismissing that seemingly obvious point by one of his viewers.
If government can protect kids from the sick radical left, shouldn't they also protect kids from hunger? Wouldn't it make sense to strengthen food stamps and have school lunch be free, since some kids are in school lunch debt? Well, I mean, if you are a parent, school lunches are not going to solve the problem.
Pause it for a second.
Any-
I want to thank that obvious person who's not a right winger pretending to be a right winger by saying framing that question exactly how they did. If conservatives are so busy battling the woke left or whatever they said, why can't they also fight hunger and help expand food stamps? That's not a conservative sending that question.
No. I disagree with you completely, Bender. I mean, I think that shows that these people who watch some of his programming, they're brainwashed into thinking that the left is coming with groomers for your kids, and they still sometimes occasionally have a thought that's a bit more tethered to common sense, and he's about to shit on it. But
expanding food
but that's
stamps,
his role.
I don't know about that.
They might just know They might just know a hungry child. I mean, a lot of conservatives really think that compassionate conservatism is a real thing that can really exist, because they sometimes see it manifest in people who call themselves conservative on a personal level in their lives, being nice to them, and don't realize that once you get higher and higher in the government, that's just again, it's a grift.
I think that's a good point, because I think a lot of people think that like the average Republican voter is like worse than the actual like politicians in power, and I actually don't think that's true.
No.
The average
I also
Republican
don't think they're pro expanding any sort of social safety net programs.
Well, they might be
school lunches though.
They might, but school lunches, that doesn't seem tied to like anything that the Democrats are pushing on a national level, or at the very least the straw man of like what the Democrats and the left represents in their mind when they tune into the Daily Wire. So they might just like not have an awareness of who's on which side on that front. But let's just watch the clip, because I think the more important kind of end point is how Shapiro tries to steer this viewer away from that thought.
If government can protect kids from the sick radical left, shouldn't they also protect kids from hunger? Wouldn't it make sense to strengthen food stamps and have school lunch be free, since some kids are in school lunch debt? Well, I mean, if you are a parent, school lunches are not going to solve the problem of child hunger at any serious level. If there is a problem of children actually starving, that is a child endangerment scenario to which CPS needs to be called. If you're talking about like actual child starvation, the truth is it does not take that much money to feed a child. I know I have 3 of them. You should be feeding your child before you feed yourself. Yeah. It's that simple.
And so it's a personal.
There's a much deeper problem at work than school lunches if kids are legitimately starving.
Fuck this piece of
Yeah. So that is it is a personal failing on your part. If your child is starving, you should either have Child Protective Services called on you, or it doesn't take that much money to feed a child, he says. That's what
I want to get to the mind of this intellectual titan of the right wing. So according to him, it doesn't take much money to feed a child, like you just said. That's what he said. But instead of solving that very affordable, cheap issue, Instead, we're going to take the child and have to provide them with shelter as well, or babysitting services. Someone's got to watch these kids that you take, and also feed them not just lunch, but then also breakfast, dinner, and the various other snacks and meals they eat throughout the day too. Very, very, very astute. Very into.
But I thought he was Mr. Facts and Logic. No, quite literally, if they have one meal provided for them at their school, where they're there presumably 5 days a week, that would take a meaningful hit into child hunger. But this pairs back with what he'd been saying about how there's actually nobody that dies of hunger in the United States. Right? That was the clip that we covered of his. No one dies of starvation in the United States, or no one dies of. There's no such thing as a living wage, is what he said, or non-living wage. And so he relies on like a semantic point in that case to discount the notion that poverty in any meaningful way exists in the United States. That one is like, he's using semantics. This is just complete stupidity. I mean, obviously anybody who listens to this.
No, I'm sorry to disagree with you guys, but this is demonic. But this is the rationale that's been underpinning society for like hundreds of years. Like hunger is valuable to people. The hunger is valuable to the powerful. Go back to like the 1700s, where Joseph Townsend, a colleague of Malthus, who thought there were people were overeating and we need to do population control, said this: "Hunger will tame the fiercest animals. It will teach decency and civility, obedience and subjection to the most perverse. In general, it is only hunger which can spur and goad the poor on to labor. Yet our laws have said they shall never hunger. The laws it must be convinced." So like that we can't be looking for logic in this. He is.
Yes, I'm only doing that rhetorically to deconstruct his branding as Mr. Logic.
Yes, exactly. But I'm saying like the rationale is actually very clear, which is this. Whereas hunger is not only so he says like, hunger is not only peaceable, silent, unremitting pressure, but as the most natural motive to industry and labor, it calls forth the most powerful exertions. And when satisfied by the free bounty of another, lays lasting and sure foundations for goodwill and gratitude. The slave must be compelled to work, but the free man should be left to his own judgment and discretion. Should be protected in the full enjoyment of his own, be it as much or little, and punished when he invades his labor's property. So like this is just like. You can't say this publicly, but this is the actual logic that runs Western civilization.
Is that hunger, some level of hunger is useful to society, which is why, and just really quick, Brandon, it's notable that we were able to keep millions of children out of poverty and out of starvation during COVID, because we actually expanded school lunches during that time period. It did reduce hunger tangibly by multiple percentage points in this country, and we chose not to do that anymore. So to back up Matt's point, it is a choice. Shapiro just can't say that. So his attempts to sound logical there, you heard the cracks, because he's not able to say what he actually means on that front, is that a certain level of hunger and insecurity is what we need in capitalism.
Yeah, they want more of it. Like that's why like things like the child tax credit or SNAP, they expire, leading to more hunger, and they act like this is all just natural policy. No, they like the hunger. They like people being deprived of things because they don't want people fed by the state or public institutions like schools. They want them fed by bosses, or they want them to starve to death.
More than anything, they want to expand that to your children too, because they know that a lot of people might choose to, in a personal situation, go without, but when they don't have kids, like he said, CPS comes in, and I know that everyone, or at least he wants to frame CPS as the good guy and people want to frame him as the bad guy, but they're a necessary part of a society where we just don't provide for resources, broadly speaking, for children, and we just have to do it piecemeal like we do everything else. Because the solution is we could just provide free lunch for all kids, and that would just be another way to get money into the hands of pockets. Money into the hands of parents who otherwise need it. But instead, we have to have children live in a type of, precarity, because it makes their parents better workers. It makes their parents more likely to stay together. It makes their parents more, or at least in their mind it does. It makes their parents more likely to go to work and not complain because they have mouths to feed at home. But, ultimately, it's just very, bleak. It's very bleak to be in a society where like we can afford all this stuff for, weapons of mass destruction abroad, and obviously it's not a reference specifically to Ukraine, but for all the other regimes we choose to spend that money on and not feed our children. I think it's understandable that a real conservative, or just like a normal person who describes themselves as conservative, would be like, that's what is your excuse for this? How come we can't do it? And all Ben Shapiro can just do is deny the reality that, it's happening, that feeding the kids at school would have any impact, even though we have data that shows otherwise. Obviously, the smart, the smart kids, or like the cool kids philosopher, never likes to engage in fact-based arguments when, it doesn't suit him. And ultimately speaking, it doesn't actually cost us as much. If it doesn't cost the state as much as it might cost a parent who is already in poverty. Because when he says like, oh, it doesn't cost that much to feed a kid, like, yeah, maybe for someone whose company can afford to pay fucking Steven Crowder $1 million or however stupid amount of money they were going to pay, tens of millions a year, it doesn't seem that much. But we know from the Bureau of I think not labor statistics, but of agriculture that tracks this kind of food nutrition stuff, that the average cost of raising a kid in middle-class household is $13,000 a year. And it's like, that's a lot of money for a family who is already living on the edge to come up with, obviously.
Yeah.
You're telling me.
Let's play this, right. Let's play this other clip related to this topic, because just like, as we grapple with the child labor crisis in this country, and you have governors like Sarah Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas passing a law that removes paperwork requirements for children working for corporations under the age of 16. And that's all to ensure that young migrant children can work in the slaughterhouse overnight and the corporations not have liability. I mean, that's what that's for. Because a lot of those, especially migrant kids, in those instances, they're working so that they can survive, so that they can feed themselves and feed their families. And that's just a symptom of mass poverty, insecurity in this country that Republicans want to paper over and pretend doesn't exist. And that includes State Senator Steve Drazkowski from Minnesota speaking about a proposal in the Minnesota State House that would provide free breakfast and lunch for all students in Minnesota.
Mr. President, I have yet to meet a person in Minnesota that is hungry. Yet today, I have yet to meet a person in Minnesota that says they don't have access to enough food to eat. Now, I should say that hunger is a relative term, Mr. President. I had a cereal bar for breakfast. I guess I'm hungry now. That, to some, might be maybe that's the definition of the bill. I don't know. I didn't see a definition of hunger in the bill, Mr. President. But I think most reasonable people suggest hunger means you don't have enough to eat in order to provide for metabolism and growth.
Metabolism. The bill's author, Democratic Farmer Labor Senator Heather Gustafson, says it's estimated that almost 275,000 students in the state get free and reduced price school meals. She said another 18% of students who would be likely to qualify haven't submitted the necessary paperwork, but roughly 1 in 6 children are food insecure, is the quote. That means they don't know when and where their next meal will be available, if they get one at all. He's never met one, but he's lying. But it's 1 in 6 Minnesota children.
There's all these headlines about this guy said, he's never met somebody, and it's like, does he not have object permanence? No, he's lying because he's a fucking demon. I want to say, like, Michael Knowles talks about demon, like this sort of idea that you take food out of people's mouth to make them so compliant. Like, to be honest, that's the only like any sort of thing you describe as demonic pales in comparison to that. And that's what this is all about. Like, there's particularly after the pandemic, like, nearly 500,000 people were food insecure because of this stuff, and the Republicans like to play their fucking violin about inflation as like, oh yeah, we really, and then all of a sudden people have all the food they need. So on the one hand, it's like, oh yeah, eggs are so expensive because they really give a fuck about that. Milk is so expensive, but on the other hand, no one's going hungry. Where's the people going hungry on that? Because they're lying about all this shit.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there's a type of appeal that the idea of, well, I've never met a hungry person. Have you? Like, even though we have all this data, that's the main source of argumentation, within our media, especially within the political sphere, that people take people take that kind of anecdotal data as though it has some sort of weight. When Ben Shapiro tells you that it doesn't cost that much to feed a child, when, someone walks out and says, I don't see any, poor people in the state of Arkansas, and everyone cheers. It's like, yeah, it's pressure from the platform that they have for everybody who fits that description, who already belongs to their group, to just stay quiet and to not make a sound because, well, maybe I'm the only one, even though we have all these statistics. It's a light form of what people call gaslighting now, but it is just the false consciousness that has been inflicted on a neoliberal society where we all just have to suffer and presume that we're suffering in solitude and silence. It's like, because all we hear at the highest level from our politicians are like these vague anecdotes about how everything that they want to be okay is okay, and everything that they want you to be afraid of is happening right now. And we've been stripped of our ability to actually contextualize that with any real data, because that just becomes like white noise on our news. Like, oh, these are kids in poverty. Okay, but let me tell you what's going on currently with Hunter Biden.
Yeah,
that's exactly
the one kid you should care about.
That is exactly such a good point, Brandon. The fact that this kind of rhetoric undermines social solidarity and allows for right-wing social Darwinist policies to get promulgated around the country because everyone internalizes it as a personal failing of their own. That is just, anyway, nail on head.
And Minnesota, I'm sure this is the case in a lot of places, but this is very stratified along particularly racial lines. I've seen numbers up to 30% of white families experience in Minnesota food insecurity. If you go to any other demographic, it is over 50%. So that might explain a little bit why Steve Demon-Drazkowski hasn't ever met anybody, because he's from rich white people, and so much of, particularly the Republican Party in these states, is just talking to rich, comfortable, insulated white people that really don't have any sort of problems besides how they can take food out of people's mouths.
Calling from a 475 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
How's it going? It's Jason from Minnesota.
Jason from Minnesota. I saw the Minnesota thing. I wanted to pick up your call for that reason.
Thank you. So I'm so fired up about this. I love that you guys are talking about it. So I remember I actually grew up in Ohio, and I've lived in Minnesota now. I remember my dad getting laid off from a steel mill, and I'm so emotional about it. I hear this stuff. I remember the lunches I had. I remember the cupboards being empty, eating a peanut butter sandwich with Cheez-Its. My mom couldn't even afford Cheez-Its. And then I grow up throughout my life, go through all this stuff. I'm a pretty progressive person. I live in Minnesota. I'm proud of my state. And I'm so freaking proud of our DFL politicians passing bills like this, because I never want another kid to have to go through crap like that ever again, just because their parent, like you guys say, can't be useful to the capitalist cause, right? And it's so important for these kids to get proper nutrition. It's such a no-brainer bill. And Minnesota did so well during COVID. They knew that kids, when they were out of school, when the lockdowns happened, they literally put food in school buses, went to the bus stops, and handed out food during the day, because people are like, wait a minute, where's the only place these kids get fed? And then when they came back to school, they had the great idea of wait a minute, just subsidize it all, right? And I think it might have been a federal thing too. And this bill is such a great idea in that let's not I think, Sam, I love how he beats it to death. Means testing is such a sham. Why means test it? Just have everybody get it. Because what if you're rich? What if you make $1 million a year? Fine. The benefit of this is that much smaller to you, and it's that much bigger to people that are in poverty. And it's so funny. What I love about stuff like this, I'm active in the DFL. I was a delegate. I support it. What I like about this is because it makes Republicans actually argue against feeding children. Put them in that position, pass this stuff and put them in the position where they go, well, actually, get Ben Shapiro to say, well, actually, actually what? Feed the kids.
Well,
So,
actually, feeding kids doesn't help their hunger. That's a common misconception that like leftists have. If you feed kids, it makes them hungrier.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing.
If you give a mouse a cookie,
well, their stomachs expand, right? And so then they get a taste for food. They get a taste for food handouts, and we don't want that in a country that wastes well over 100 billion pounds of food a year.
Well, and then you think about it too. Now the schools can plan better. Okay, I have X number of kids. I get X number of dollars per kid per year. Can you have better economies of scale for sourcing food for the kids now? Because now like, well, are the kids going to buy lunch, or are they going to pack? Now they're going to go, well, I get X amount of number of money a year. Now I can plan better. Can we actually source better food for the kids? And it's just better in so many different ways.
No, we should be.
We
should be spending a lot more than whatever the $3 that we spend for each kid. Like Ben Shapiro in that EL says, it's not even that good of food. We haven't even got to his response yet, where he said, like a lot of that food's wasted actually, and it's not even very good quality. It's like pay for good quality food.
Yeah. And
if we gave these kids,
is not wealthy. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if we gave these kids food, where's the money for cop overtime going to come from? You hate to say it, but if kids had food and school supplies in their schools, like Officer O'Reilly would not be able to drive around Boston in an APC tank. That's just the trade-off our society has made.
Right.
Our society has made, and this is this is why it's good that Black Lives Matters highlights these things, and when people get mad at them or try to associate the fact that this is a true statement with whatever goes on in their nonprofit, it's just it's not the same. Is that our lack of infrastructure spending, our lack of spending on children and other municipal stuff is directly related to our spending on both police and private prisons. Mm-hmm. And you might say that we don't live in the kind of society to where if we didn't give that money to police that we would give it to children, but certainly we do live in a society where we don't give that money to children and we do give it to police. And that tells us the kind of values that we have. We don't give it to the water treatment in our towns. We don't give it to the road repair people, the garbage men. We give it to the police, and we have them sit around and menace people, whether they are doing it on school grounds or just outside your local a bar establishment. And that's just those are just the trade-offs that America has made as a country that likes to believe that it's so full of inborn threats that it requires a militarized police force, and any amount of money you might give to the rearing of children or to social services is going to inevitably end up into the hands of the same people that those police are meant to be violently putting down. So what's the point? It's a very vicious cycle we have here in this society where why give kids stuff? They're just going to grow up to be criminals, right? And then we just have to give the police more money. We don't want smart criminals, right? It's just really.
Well, doesn't that go right along? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, doesn't that go right along with Matt was saying earlier around how hunger forces people to work? There's this mindset of I see what you're saying, Brandon, and I think it's kind of the same side of the same coin, where I wish Democrats, even couch this in a sense of we want to feed kids, and not just to make them productive workers. I get it, but wouldn't we have a more creative, vibrant society if our kids weren't hungry at school and they felt safe? And wouldn't they be better at just being better people? And wouldn't that just make things better, where we don't need this coercive vision of coercing people?
Right, but there's a whole class. There's a whole class of people invested in coercion.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is the Democrats also 100%. Represent the capitalist class, and Target doesn't want these people fed either. And yeah.
And and also remember what happened to Michelle Obama when she said you should eat apples at school. And obviously that's just that's a sort of an acontextual point, but they savaged her for saying your kids should eat vegetables at school. But the reality is the Democrats don't have really the best of intentions when it comes to education reform. They might be better at school reform. They might be better at wanting your kids to get an apple at school. And that might make your kid better at learning in various ways. But the truth is, as a country, we need education reform. The entirety of school or reform as it pertains to education can't simply be located in the classrooms and the teachers and the various like school lunches. It has to be a bucket of solutions that affects the entire community surrounding the schools. Like our schools now can't just be little islands, little like oases in like a middle of a underserved ghetto or maldistributed like location in an inner city where there's a food desert. And that's the only place you can get lunch. Like, and I think that's where like the Democrats stop too. Like they don't think of it as like a whole social solution.
100%.
So they can be better
yeah.
than the Republicans about it, but they don't necessarily fully embrace that these are like interconnected things. Like, not having food at home, even if you get fed at school, is still going to impact your learning. And so we have to give people food at home and give them food at school.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this is exactly why they come up short with this Silicon Valley Bank regulation too. Like we need to add regulation, but we need to also have public banking and things like that. And like this moment right now, the right wing is attacking public schools on all sorts of fronts. Like, and this is just a way to make sure public schools don't get increased federal funding for hunger, because that would bolster them as institutions. And we need to have we need to realize like, okay, are we going to actually do this public education thing or not? And we need to do it. But we're coming from a place where the Democrats, like 8 years ago or wherever, were still in charter school mode. So it's like.
But even with the school lunch program, like just during COVID, when we federalized this and we expanded school lunches, there was no bureaucracy. I mean, people report how school administrators found it a lot easier because they could just hand out free lunches as opposed to kids having to apply on a case-by-case basis and this paperwork being involved. But that's the limits of our current Democratic Party. They prefer that kind of system. They prefer COBRA to Medicare expansion. They want things to be more bureaucratic because then there are guardrails and there's like a barrier between that and universal programs in this society structure. Yeah.
The biggest conceit of modern Democrats, the pragmatist whatever center, they think, oh, you went too far, we became whatever, too woke, no, us stopping short of these more, and for everything you guys have listed, are not crazy ideas. Let's just do it better. We stopped short and we lost people because of that.
People like blame. No, I mean, definitely, you lose voters triangulating, and also you lose voters like saying you're going to do something and never delivering because people just like lose interest and they eventually get it. But people love to blame the woke thing. And you see a lot of that with like the Silicon Valley Bank and the ESG stuff. But that to me is like, that to me is like the Sam Bankman-Fried giving that like impromptu interview to that like Vox reporter going like, yeah, I just said all that woke bullshit because it's what people want to hear. And like, that's basically why my company failed. And it's just like, no. Your company failed for the various reasons that all of these, like, for the fraud reasons and Sam Bankman-Fried. But, when you see people blaming woke politics for the failure of companies or the failure of political parties, there, you usually only have to scratch the surface very like gingerly, maybe give it a little blow before you think, oh, here's all the fraud. Here's all the self-dealing. Here's all the corruption. Here's all of the consultants being paid hundreds of millions of dollars every year to understand, like, that there's no wokeness other than the veneer that the language gives you. Everything else is just the same old that other companies are doing and that fail like left and right.
All right. Well, we got to jump, Jason, but I really appreciate the call.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great show.
Yep. Thanks so much.
I mean, would really be my favorite thing to talk about every single day. And it'd be nice to have a Democratic Party and shout out to the Minnesota Democrats for making it an issue, because, you see the freak out that happens when it does. But it's like, compared to this versus like people being fed versus the fucking Twitter files.
Yeah, right. Let's read some IMs, then we'll do another clip. One more call. Get out of here. Juniper J, if the Saudis align with the Chinese, will this destroy the situation where the U.S. is the global reserve currency? The power of the dollar is based on Saudi oil barrels. I would say the power of the dollar is based on our imperialism. So for now, I don't agree with. But look, that's part of China's triangulation here. They do want to undercut the power of the United States dollar. I already read that one. Small D. Santis, there's a vicious rumor going around that I'm a slob who lacks charisma. This is false. If you talk about how gross and antisocial I am, Florida will sue you. Hugh Glass, huge ass. All right. How do you insinuate that Portland is not Antifa headquarters? Dalaban, Emma, yesterday I noticed Jimmy Dore's retweeting comments on your posts. Oh, okay. I was wondering what the hell, like I'm getting all these weirdos. And he's obsessed with me. It's pretty funny.
Also, the lab leak theory is a bunch of fucking bullshit, and the people that are running with it, like not only Jimmy Dore, but like Nate Silver and all these people, like they're all fucking morons.
Well, I mean, they literally, even the intelligence report said low confidence.
Well, I mean, I don't give a fuck about they don't know shit either. Like,
I know, but the point is that if they're conceding it, Matt, that means that it's even dumber.
But I also think like it's just I think that it's weird that like all these people like see the FBI said it when it's like you listen to actual doctors and it's like yeah the FBI isn't considering like the things that we consider.
Right.
Also, though, it always gets brought up. It always gets brought up and re-enters the news cycle based on just people talking about the same information again. There's been no new revelations on this matter for quite some time. Yet every time it gets brought up, it's spoken about as if there's been some newly uncovered piece of information that, gives them a stronger argument when that's just hasn't been the case.
But back to the I haven't been posting about that. It says Dalaban, has he been creeping on your post for a while, or is that a new thing? Kind of weird since the post didn't have anything to do with him. It was like about wokeness or something. So it has nothing to do with the lab leak thing either. He's just on my thing.
Oh wait, he got upset that you said
I said
replace woke with blackness?
I think that must be it. I have him muted, so I just don't know.
I mean, you can go rub Kyle Rittenhouse's feet some more
you could,
with regards to that, I think.
Listener for Compton, it's not only the social media apps like TikTok and Facebook that spy. It's also U.S. cell phone carriers like AT&T that had extreme willingness to help the NSA capture massive amounts of warrantless data and metadata after 9/11. Some people considered it just shy of a backdoor for metadata into the company, similar to what people are worried about is happening with Chinese tech companies. I mean, the hypocrisy that the United States is really going to chastise China over its involvement with TikTok after what we know came out in the Snowden revelations is hilarious.
We fucking spied on Germany. I'm also reading White Mouse by Susan Williams, which we should get on. We should get Susan Williams on the show. The CIA and the covert recolonization of Africa, and it goes into how we and Israel and the UK had this cryptography stuff that was just like, oh, we'll sell this to you guys so you can message securely across the world. And oh, by the way, there's a backdoor built into that we can read all that shit. Like, it's no wonder why no one fucking trusts us around the world.
Yes. Left-wing Limbaugh, I know hypocrisy is dead and this is a minor point, but it's always been odd to me that the anti-woke crowd is the same group that calls everyone else sheep. If you are anti-woke, you are literally not awake, i.e. asleep.
I'm an independent thinker because I believe in ivermectin and the lab leak theory.
And I'm asleep.
They're anti-woke because they spend too much time online, and so they're surrounded by cool people online, and so they think that they're being targeted for being uncool. Right. That's just basically it.
Oh, I just want to shout out the Decoding the Gurus podcast. They did a recent episode on the lab leak theory that goes about 3 hours, and people should check that out if they want info on that.
Black Marxist.
I'm still riding the snake venom theory.
I like that Emma wanted to dunk on Ben Shapiro, but I strongly disagree with her that social interaction with people that someone's romantically interested in isn't hard. Shapiro and Peterson appealed to awkward, disaffected men, some who are on the spectrum. That wasn't my point, but I understand the if I wasn't precise in my language. My point is that particularly they make it seem harder and like a mathematical equation, and what they do is create barriers to social interaction when it's easier if you go to other sources for guidance on that.
Yes.
And kindness is right the way
they
to
mystify
go.
it.
Right, exactly. And right, go on.
Also, I mean, that's something I always find very interesting, especially in communities like around Andrew Tate and incel communities where it's like they fail to recognize they're not good at making men friends either. They don't have positive male social interactions because the social interactions they have are usually related to incel spaces or comments on a Ben Shapiro video. That's just toxic sociality. Those are people who are trying to keep you a cult, trying to keep you ingratiated to their specific way of thinking, which makes you unable to make positive relationships with other people. And so a lot of times, like, it's not good to give them any credit, because all they're trying to do is get people to like put all their social worth in like whether or not they can like make female sexual companions. And that's like a whole separate type of, thing that we just have to stamp out. Like, it's not enough to just like go through girlfriends and that's how you have your social, like, that's how you have your positive social interactions besides your like online incel groups. People just need more communities. People need to have more community spaces. And I think there does need to be a little bit more effort put at the like, media level, and like explain that, yeah, it's not all about dating. That's like the only kind of social interaction we give a lot of like space to.
Let's do this Russell Brand clip really quickly. So here's Russell Brand talking about his latest appearance on Tucker Carlson's show, the daytime one.
Russell Brand, an employee, we should say, of Cantor Fitzgerald Acquisition Corporation number 6, also known as Rumble.
Who owns Rumble? Who's invested in that? Do we know?
A bunch of people. Bunch of Silicon Valley freaks. Like, is Teal one of them? I'm not sure, but like those sorts of guys.
Okay. But, I mean, there are often corporations probably invested in Rumble. Rumble is a corporation in and of itself. Could that qualify as corporate media?
It's a publicly traded stock. Yeah, it's it's as I said, Cantor Fitzgerald Acquisition Corporation number 6.
Well, yeah, I'm just pointing that out. Joe Rogan works for a corporation called Spotify. Tucker Carlson works for a major corporation called News Corp, which owns Fox News, and he has now been publicly shamed, rightfully so, and it's been revealed through the Dominion discovery that he was worried about the stock price for his corporate media company. So with all of that
Teal
said,
and Vance are indeed Rumble.
Okay,
investors.
I just wanted to. I couldn't remember which one. So yes, the Peter Thiel investment vehicle.
Because they love free speech.
All of this is a prelude to say, Russell Brand is really against corporate media. But here he is speaking about Tucker Carlson and his program, who just platformed him, and says, Tucker Carlson's homeless person position, not so bad.
Yeah. And I want to preface this with saying, like, Russell's talking about how good it is that he got onto Tucker to talk about the ideals we all share on the left. And like I'll just say his elaboration of those ideas are mainly like personal autonomy, and you should be able to control your own community, which sounds nice, I think, maybe to like a British hippie, but to Americans sounds a little bit neo-Confederate. But I'll just say we can play this here. As I think he wants credit for challenging Tucker on this homelessness thing, and instead he just does his laundry.
Say that kind of stuff on a mainstream channel is helpful and advances the conversation, and is generally, I would say, conciliatory in tone. Elsewhere in the chat, I explicitly say that I believe people should be able to identify however they want, express themselves however they want, as long as they don't hurt anyone else, obvious kind of stuff like that. And I specifically spoke to Tucker around the issue of homelessness. The only thing that I've ever seen, sir, that I would call you up on is when I've seen you talking about homelessness, and I feel that when talking about the subject of destitution and people that live in poverty, that the basis for that conversation should be love, and also for all of the displaced people in the world, that the foundational principle should be love. I'm not claiming that I'm able to maintain that line when something offends me for some cultural or personal reason, but I know that this is what I aspire to.
I agree with that, and I feel that drug addicts living outside are used as political pawns to destabilize society. I feel like they're not treated on purpose. The mentally ill live outside and die outside, and are left to do that because it's useful for the people in power to draw attention away from their own misdeeds. And I'm angry about it, but I'm not angry at the fentanyl addict. I'm angry at the industry that's grown up around him that doesn't treat any of his needs, that leaves him to die alone, and that becomes rich doing so. And that the politicians who posture about his death when they could have prevented it. And unfortunately, I get so overheated, I get so pissed that in many cases I have allowed myself to sound like I'm mad at the junkie when I'm certainly not. As a sober person, I have deep empathy for anyone who's lost an addiction, particularly on the street.
Can you pause for a sec? I'm so sorry. You are a drug addict, Tucker Carlson said. Get a job or leave. Pull up your pants and get the hell out of here. Go somewhere with lower standards. Head for a place where politicians don't care about their people, because we do care, and that's why we're hauling your tent to a landfill and cutting off your checks today. That's what he said in January of 2022 on his program. Carlson took aims at cities for funding homeless outreach, including overdose prevention centers in New York, which in fact means helping the homeless get high. He snapped. Okay.
I also love how he's like very much like, you know what? I feel like sometimes I'm a little bit too harsh on those dirty drug addicts that I talk about sometimes. And it's not that I hate it's not that I hate it's not that I hate the vagrant. It's not that I hate the toothless junkie, but I actually have a deep respect for that.
We got to play Russell's like
I'm sorry, but just Tucker in particular, I had to put that in there.
Myself to sound like I'm mad at the junkie when I'm certainly not. As a sober person, I have deep empathy for anyone who's lost an addiction, particularly on the street.
So there we go. Tucker Carlson, who on a personal level was extremely kind and beautiful to me, and I think is a good person.
Wow.
And I don't believe that he is a
Big dumbass
negative
energy.
influence in American cultural life. I believe that you have to accept that people have different perspectives on cultural issues, and if you don't, the alternative is some form of tyranny, and hopefully it's the form of tyranny that you happen to agree with. And I don't think that's the answer, because it's a big old world out there.
Everything. One form of tyranny is on one side, the other's on the other. Who can say it's fascism or, the government being expansive and providing services for people?
I want to go over, this is why like a Cantor Fitzgerald Acquisition Corporation made a good investment in Russell Brand and Steven Crowder, like those people, because this sort of populist obfuscation of the real problem. Homelessness is not a failure of capitalism in the real estate industry. It is a failure of one party. And you should vote for the Republicans, basically, is the implicit message if you want to solve that. And I just say, like, that is absurd.
Well, one thing that strikes me about like celebrities with huge platforms, and even just like people who write for like various publications online, and you'll see it a lot, is that, and this goes back to what you were saying about Republican politicians often being like more evil and craven than like even their most evil and craven like base. Like, people who have platforms like Russell Brand are oftentimes way more willing to believe and accept that everyone else is being unfair to somebody else with a big platform. Everyone else is being overly critical of someone else with a big platform. Everyone else is misrepresenting or misunderstanding what that person is saying, because they like to instinctually, because of class solidarity, or rather social position solidarity, because they have the same kind of job, put themselves in the position of that person. And it's always to our detriment when they like launder these types of terrible actors back into like the range of reasonability. Oh, they were nice to me and you like me, so if they're nice to me, doesn't that make them good people on a personal level? It's like, no, it doesn't really matter, because they're like definitely bad people on a professional and like political level. But it oftentimes also ends up to their own detriment, because in a lot of these cases, whether it's like a Twitch streamer or like a writer, like putting their neck out for people they've been told are like really bad and really problematic for like years, it comes to bite them in the ass. And then all they can do is go like a year from now, so when I said Tucker was a good person, turns out I was wrong. Everyone else was right, but you can't expect me to listen. Honestly, come on now, corporate hippie type. You can't expect me to, when people say this person's bad, millions of people, but they don't understand. I need to experience that for myself. I need to experience it.
But it's amazing. That was
Like,
amazing.
and then they get mad that everyone's like, oh, you should have known, obviously.
But it's got to be more deliberate than that, and more than just like he was nice to me, because he was making this very similar case on Bill Maher, which is that Fox News and MSNBC are the same. Even though we have like, because they're both corporate media, that's true, right? Like, you can have a criticism of them both as corporate media, but then there's a separate criticism of Fox News as like an outfit that's deliberately lying to its audience and knows it, and we know that from Dominion. So it's not, both sides are their own version of tyranny, and you have to decide like what kind of tyranny is right for you. Like, it has to be you're flattening the discourse, and we've seen this time and time again. That is a way that benefits the right almost every single time.
And also, that's a professional argument from somebody who like operates on corporate platforms to go like, if you want to be a pundit, you can either write for the New York Times, or you can write for the Washington Journal, or you can write for any number of these big magazines and have to deal with the fact that institutionally they're evil. And that's just, pick your poison, or you can not be in that industry in any meaningful way. And so when you're already in that industry, it seems like a very reasonable thing to be like, oh, every platform's the same, a boss, a CEO, someone who wants to tell you what to do. And it's like, but from the outside, from people who don't have that kind of like professional ambition, it's just like, you can't see the difference between like MSNBC and Fox News. It's like, certainly they have various things the same. They're part of a larger system, but clearly one is worse unless you're just looking for a job.
But yeah, and also he's bullshitting when he says like they're the same. One, he goes on and has a friendly chat with Tucker Carlson, says like actually he's a really nice guy and we agree on a lot. And the other, he goes on and like challenges Joe Scarborough. And I like going on MSNBC and challenging Joe Scarborough. But if they're both the same, you would have gone on and said, "Oh, Joe, you're actually really nice to me and we actually agree on a lot of things. Look at us having cross aisle conversations." But he's not. He's an asset for Cantor Fitzgerald Acquisition Corporation number 6, and it's a real shame because I liked Russell Brand going back to BBC Radio 6,
liked
BBC
his podcast,
Radio 2,
saw him live,
Audio
loved
Boom.
his politics. I thought I loved his politics, except for like I'm not going to vote. But
I mean, but he came around on that, and
Yeah.
he ultimately found like even though there is limitations within the Labour Party, it's better than the Tories. And also he's done previously work in support of the NHS, which is being hollowed out. And I'll just say, like, if you watch his talk with Stephen Crowder, who's emerged from his hole, he has a big long talk about how the authoritarian tyranny and centralized control, and then he lets Stephen Crowder go on this jaunt about how government is really bad and like doesn't Obamacare prove it, and not even remotely do you feel like Russell Brand's going to like stand up for the NHS, because that shit is behind him now. He's now an
COVID
asset
broke
for
his
Cantor
brain.
Fitzgerald Acquisition Corporation number 6, just like everybody else on Rumble.
Right.
Yep.
It took like I said, it took me a second to realize what you were saying when you said if you listen to his talk with Stephen Crowder, who emerged from his hole.
yeah.
But I got it. I caught up. No, yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous to see someone like Russell Brand go this route, but it's not surprising. We're seeing this with so many of these guys now. They find that the money is right and the grift is too good on the other side. That combined with a number of them truly had their brains broken by the pandemic. Like it totally, like, I don't know if they got COVID and COVID actually did neurological damage like we're now understanding COVID can do, or if their brains just literally broke from the idea of there being a pandemic. And just a few weeks for someone like Russell Brand to hang out on a yacht was just too much for him to handle. But yeah, this is just like the new way going forward for so many of these guys. And I don't think there's going to be that retrospective from someone like Russell Brand. Honestly, I think this is who he is now going forward till the day he hangs up his boots. Honestly.
Yeah.
It's a real shame.
All right, guys. I'm sorry. I thought we'd have another call in us, but that's all for calls. Sorry if you've been hanging on the line, but just too much stuff to get to. What can I say? We're gonna read some IMs and get out of here. Murray the York. Lek don't miss. I agree. Woke leaded baby food. Hi, MR crew. French President Macron.
Like that name.
Yeah. Hi, MR crew. French President Macron has forced his pension measures through Parliament without a vote. Yep, I saw that was maybe gonna happen, and so he's actually doing it. Okay, using an obscure constitutional provision. Why is he making this his hill to die on, especially since the pensions in France are not at all at risk of collapse? He's been in power for a while, is my guess. This is actually something ideological for him, and he wants to get this done. Like, this is not, an agenda that's popularist.
Yeah, this is why
ideological.
This is why the bankers put him in power.
Yep. Sam's mailman. I think the Gitmo stories probably help pawn DeSantis with his right-wing base. Well, I mean, but there's an entire effort to make him the moderate of the Republican Party, so it's helpful for that.
More digestible than
Gitmo, I don't know.
Interesting word.
If he wants to embrace his time as a Gitmo lawyer and thinks that's going to be helpful in a general election, be my guest.
J-Man raps. Hey guys, I was arguing with someone about gas stoves yesterday. It's amazing how, in my opinion, elitist these so-called populist Republicans are. Taking away the freedom to have gas stoves, OMG, that's the real issue. Anyway, this winter here on the Canadian East Coast is I've literally been sweating almost every time I go outside with a winter jacket. Man. Tater tot. Remember, Matt, it's the fun half. Why can't we talk about Ron de Pudding? Well, we did. So there you go.
We did. I just like it like compared to other stuff that I don't feel like it's emphasized enough. It's just like, okay, I guess he says Thai food.
But
Let's
that
put it
one
this way-
makes
let's put
more
it this
sense
way,
than the
though.
pudding one.
What's more likely? Trump going with Guantanamo Ron, or Trump going with Ron the snack pack?
Rontanamo Bay. Rontanamo.
I like Deep State Ron. I don't know,
Yeah.
we'll see.
Pudding Ron.
Kid tested, Politburo approved. I feel like it's the same with Trump. Terrible human, and people are weirdly obsessed with how he drinks water or leans forward weirdly. Congressional baseball fan. Hot take: Emma has the best Ben Shapiro impression on the show. It's only the only take. That's probably the only one I can beat anybody on, though. MIDI doctors. School dinners are a massively effective measure and were instrumental in relieving child hunger in post-World War II UK. I mean, it should be obvious. Quantum Leap. Speaking of Thomas Malthus, both Jane Goodall and Greta Thunberg are Malthusons. I don't even know who that is, Thomas Malthus.
I don't know.
Population guy.
Like that's a.
But I'm not sure if that's accurate.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, I don't follow everything.
Oh, the depopulation guy?
Yeah, I don't follow everything that those people put out. Climate celebrities. I think there is a Malthusian strain within a lot of climate culture. I think with regards to Greta. Hopefully she can be moved away from that to the extent she has embraced it. But I mean, she's fucking 18.
Yeah, I don't know if I would need some evidence on that.
I don't think
I wouldn't be surprised if Jane
Malthusian.
Goodall, who's also older, might have some problematic
Yeah, I
views.
don't follow Jane.
Well, Jane Goodall has some problematic ideas
Yeah.
about climate. But she also lived with apes for 12 years. I can see how you might come from the jungle and be like, "It's all a little weird." But I mean, ultimately, you shouldn't get your climate politics from a teenager.
I've been signing to monkeys for the last 2 decades, and I'm a totally normal person.
After seeing, I'm sure when they unshrunk the main guy from Fern Gully, he didn't like people as much either. So
I mean,
I can't blame him.
yeah, it's
I've
like
seen
trying
Avatar.
to reintegrate the Tom Hanks character from Castaway into society.
I will not be voting for Jane Goodall in the primary.
Magic Q Ball. You can say that Senator Drazkowski has a point. If you spend your whole day talking to lobbyists and millionaires before hours of fundraising, you can truthfully say you've never met anyone who's hungry.
Yeah, or anybody who's sober.
Yeah, that too. Mike from Bavaria, nutrition aside, eating together is a social event, and conservatives don't want rich and poor kids to develop empathy. Yes. I mean,
schools are attacked as a civic center for people in communities. And Republicans hate that because they want you all isolated and going to do McDonald's drive-through and go back to your home and consume some content from the streaming services.
Yeah, it's all broadly a war for public space at the end of the day to an extent.
Yeah. I mean,
Republicans saw one.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I really didn't have much to add.
I was going to say Republicans saw one episode of Abbott Elementary and decided that schools definitely need to be abolished now.
I'll just say, I watched the most recent Abbott Elementary, and they had the most recent one had a whole charter school arc where some smooth talking guy comes in saying we're going to make this all better, and the parents revolt saying, "Hey, what about you kicking my kid out of the other school and that sort of stuff?" They had
Give a choice.
They've had a good line, and it's not the funniest show, and in many ways it's a cut and paste of The Office into a public school setting. But on unions they had a good take, and on the charter schools they had a good take. So.
Much better than the politics of The Office, which are actually your work life should be everything to you, and that's your real family.
Yeah.
And also, it's really cool that Michael harasses everybody at his workplace and is racist.
No, he's actually the worst boss ever. He's someone who should almost maybe go to jail.
He should probably be in prison.
How bad of a boss he is.
Bingo Dango. Oh, look, Russell Brand sitting there in the same seat Charles Murray sat when Rucker had him on that same show.
Got
Totally
to have
a man
a
of the left.
convivial conversation in it, Charles.
Conviviality.
All right, 3 more. Dave from Jamaica. Jane Goodall had some very anti-human takes, especially Africans. Not sure if that's true about Greta. I don't buy the Greta thing, but that's also because I love her.
I mean, like Greta, it's she says some good things just as bad things as a child activist might.
Yeah.
Jane Goodall, I honestly, I don't know when the last time I thought of Jane Goodall was.
I think she's 98. I think it's okay to I think it's okay to put Jane Goodall. Are you a primatologist? It's okay to put Jane Goodall in the past.
Yeah, I don't think of her much, but Dave from Jamaica also says Russell Brand's ego has turned him into a fool. 2 more. A from Canada, Ulsterholm addressed the possibility of the lab stuff. It is unlikely. Almost 2 years ago now, and it's so dumb to see these people discover basically the same information every 6 months and act like.
But
they
you know
found a new
why?
continent.
It's because of the meta conversation, which is that the thought police don't want you to say it, and that's all. That's the same currency that Charles Murray traded on in the 90s.
Which is so fucking funny because right now the Biden administration and all the Republicans in Congress are uniformly anti-China. Like, there's no thought police there. They all agree with you idiots.
Yeah.
That's why we have to believe the FBI or something.
Yeah. Oh, well, see? You guys didn't want to believe it, but the FBI said so.
And the final I am of the day, Brandon from Kentucky. Matt, I'm still laughing about your quip yesterday that it was suspicious that Sam visited the bank just before it closed during the 2008 crisis. Is it possible that Sam bought lockpicking kits for Saul just to do another bank sabotage? Bunch of brick bars missing from what's the stupid bank in Hogwarts?
Gringotts.
All right. Well, yeah. It's just like, why did the wizarding system? You have to physically go to the bank to get your coins.
I feel about the goblins.
I know, and get them from the Jews.
They need some innovation in the financial sector there. Like, they don't even have ATMs yet.
Yeah, I mean, they don't even have phones, I think. All right. What?
I was gonna say, wait till they find out about arbitrage, the opportunities with gold.
Their needs for arbitrage in the wizarding world. All right, guys. Appreciate you all. Great stuff. We will see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know